everybody. We are here for the December 8th Planning Commission meeting. I call this meeting to order. Let's do a roll call.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Takahashi?
Here.
Commissioner Saxena?
Here.
Commissioner Fung?
Here.
And Vice Chair Wong?
Here. So wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you. So this meeting is being conducted pursuant to provisions of the Brown Act and a recent executive order issued by the governor to facilitate teleconferencing to reduce the risk of COVID-19 transmission at public meetings. Ordinarily, the Brown Act sets strict rules for teleconferencing. The governor's executive order has suspended those rules. The executive order does require that we continue to notice meetings in advance. The city has met all the applicable notice requirements. Members of the public may offer public comment by email to planningcommission@cupertino.org prior to the close of the public comment period for each agenda item. Staff will share all such comments with the commission committee, subject to the time limits applicable to public comment, and make them part of the record. So with that, staff, have you received any public comments on any item by email?
We haven't received anything as of the start of the meeting, but I'll check as we go through.
Very cool. Well, in that case, let's begin the oral communications. For those following along, oral communications, this is the portion of the meeting reserved for persons wishing to address the commission on any matter within the jurisdiction of the commission and not on the agenda. So speakers are limited to 3 minutes, and in most cases, state law will prohibit the commission from making any decisions with respect to meeting not on the agenda. Do we have any guests today?
Actually, Vice Chair, we should probably do the approval of minutes first.
Good idea. I've missed that. Let's do approval of minutes. I am rusty. So we have the draft minutes from November 10th, 2020, and the recommended action is to approve or modify the draft minutes. Let's give everybody a chance to go through the draft minutes.
Hopefully everybody's had a chance to review. We can entertain a motion whenever the commission is ready.
And whenever you guys are ready. Yep.
I have comments, so I probably prefer not to make the motion, but.
Well, what comments do you have? So,
let's see. I had a number of comments on item 2. You know, that, of course, we have a full video record of the meeting, so anybody who wants to know what was discussed can go back and watch. I think there was probably 2 hours in that in item 2. I felt that the description kind of implies some consensus where there wasn't. So I'd like to suggest some modifications. Of course, we can wrangle through it. The first one was, let's see, in that paragraph, there's a line that kind of read regarding the use of the 2019 household count as the baseline. I don't think there was really a consensus on that. The way it's written, you know, they recommended implies there was, and I don't think that there was on that. There were people who felt in favor of that, people who felt in favor of doing things that were not 2019. So I'd recommend that we strike that and perhaps change that. In particular, I think the thing that particularly made me notice that was that it originally read, they recommended that the city council recommend use of the 2019 households as baseline for all reasons from, and then referred to the city association letter that was part of the packet. The city's association letter actually doesn't recommend the use of 2019 households. It talks on a number of kind of technical reasons why they felt that the distribution of projected housing was unfair. So I'd like to ask that we consider removing that and change that to something like they recommend the city council, they being us, recognize the findings of the city's association August 20 letter identifying technical issues with housing allocations. In the next section, we kind of went on, so that was part of the sentence, and then the rest of that, I would probably say something. I think it would be very fair to say that the commissioners highlighted impacts on RENA assumptions due to unknown pandemic-related changes, such as net outflow of jobs. and the rest of that line. I think that actually more accurately reflects the discussion. There was also a line in there that read, they recommend the council refer to the Embarcadero Institute report. I don't think that was consensus. I mean, I certainly wouldn't agree with that. I think that was, 3 minutes out of a long hearing. So I would actually ask that we drop that entire sentence. And then the final change was in the very last, there's some repetition, and that's to be expected from a long hearing. In the last sentence, it kind of reads moderate income categories. Consider the use of job proximity transit for moderate and above income categories, since they're considered in the Planet Bay Area as factors as why the city has growth potential. I think that part's good. The part about it not aligning with GHG reduction goals is probably not true. So I would ask that we strike that as well.
I see if any other commissioners have any suggestions, objections, changes, support.
That was a long time ago.
I think the argument here, I think the disagreement is here with what, so go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, no. Nothing Commissioner Funk said strikes me as something that I have an issue with or remember. So I guess I'm fine with his recommended changes.
I'm kind of curious as to what it was. I'd have to go back to the video to understand what was said, but I do believe that I think the first part of Commissioner Fung's recommendation regarding the use of 2019 households as a baseline, I don't think we recommended that. I think we all had some belief that these numbers should be different. So,
yeah.
So that part, I think I'm in agreement with. I do want to check the video before we make any such changes. And unfortunately, that would take us into January for the next meeting. The second part, I would say that a number of us, not all of us, did recommend that council refer to the Embarcadero Institute. And I would say that's probably, 3 of us. It would be a majority, but not everybody. So I think that's a good point there. I'm not sure about the last statement. I kind of want to go review the video and double check before we make those changes. So maybe we suggest a postponement of the minutes on that grounds, if that's okay with everybody.
Sure, I'd be happy to send an alternate draft, but we can, of course we can, edit it in any way. I think it was just a matter of reflecting. It was a long discussion trying to reflect in a paragraph. So.
Well, with no paragraphs. It's a long paragraph, so I understand. Okay. Well, let's. I don't think we need to make a motion to postpone the minutes to another time, but let's leave this for the next agenda item if that's possible, and let's move on to item number 2. Actually, oral communications before we go to item number 2. So let's do that. And do we, Beth, clerk, Evan, do we have anyone that has raised their hand in terms of asking for participation in oral communications? And a reminder, if you've got interest in that, let's explain the process of what you need to do. I believe you just click raise your hand and someone will call you and bring you into the Zoom.
Thank you, Vice Chair Wong. We do have 5 raised hands on our list right now. I don't know if these are for oral communications or for our item that doesn't specifically say, but we can start at the top.
That. Okay. All right.
Fang Yi, did you wish to speak at this time?
Yes, sure. So this
and how do you pronounce your name so we all have it properly for the record as well?
So,
okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I was not
Welcome.
intended to be the first speaker, but I would agree on what Peter is going to say regarding the Verizon 5G antenna. So I live in 882 Branch Drive, which is a very residential street. It's near Blaney, Bollinger, and Creekside Park, but it's very short street. It's not even intersection, just a T-shaped stuff. And I just wondering why there will be a antenna built there. and my house is like cross street to the light pole, and it's only second story there. And according to the document that Verizon emailed to me, it's like 10 on my master bedroom, which is facing the street. It's like 10 times higher than the one that's on the ground. So which makes me a little bit concerned, actually very concerned. So I support what Peter going to say that like any of such things should be 100 feet away from the residence, just as what we do for the schools and the parks, playgrounds. So I know that city is limited in what they can do. So as another suggestion, I would like to say, like from the city, that if you can ask Verizon to install some of the radiation detection device on my home, not just the one-time testing, just like install alarm, just like the smoke alarm. You know, you probably it never ring, just like smoke alarm. You don't hear it, but it's there. It's giving me a sense of safety. So I think similar things should be installed in the home in case this one is being built. And I also like Verizon to install some radioactive blocking material in my attic, so that I get less radiation. And I think what Peter suggests, 100 feet is very good. And also his suggestion of giving a temporary permit instead of permanent permit is also very good, because 5G is really a very new thing, and lots of cities are trying to catch up of how to deal with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and appreciate it.
Vice Chair Wong, apologize for interrupting. The clock is up. It's on a separate window, so you don't have to hold up your cell phone. But of course, you can still do that if you want. But we do have the clock up.
Oh, wonderful. Great. I'm glad people can see that. That is amazing. Thank you for doing that. Oh, I see it in the gallery view. Got it. Okay. Well, let's call him Peter Chu. It sounds like he's got something to say.
Oh, okay, Peter, you're unmuted.
Yes, I'm unmuted. Thank you, Vice Chair and Commissioners. My name is Peter Chu, and I live just south of Creekside Park along Miller Avenue. So I'll try and use my 3 minutes. I think starting in November, I received the same letter from Verizon. They want to install antenna in a light post right next to the house. And so I did a quick look. You may all be aware that this is the beginning of the 5G rollout, probably starting in Q4. And when I first looked, there were about 50 of the planned permits that are in process already granted. And then by now, there's over 100. So the number is increasing fast, and that's only Verizon. I'm also want to just paint the picture that this is one carrier. We're probably looking at 3 or 4 carriers. And in conversation in the last City Hall, in the City Council's meeting, Deborah, City Manager, said that this is probably going to be in the hundreds. So I think this is just something that we have to deal with. I'm all for 5G. But I think that what I'm seeing right now is that even though we have guidelines, which are very soft recommendations that are put out by the city manager, but my understanding is that the city council hasn't had any real input into the guidelines, and neither had the residents. All of our sort of concerns have been factored in. So I like sort of the city council to be able to address that, because without that, I think Verizon's actually taking advantage of the situation, actually abusing a lot of the guidelines. For example, guidelines says at the very beginning that we want to move them as far away from residents as possible. And then the minimum distance to residents is 20 feet. Guess what? Many of us are seeing it within 25 feet of a second-story building, antennas are going up. So this is in light of the guideline that says that you go non-residential first and then residential. You go to the main street first, you go cross-cuts first before you go to residential. So there's like 6 categories of preferences, but they've gone to the last category in this very first wave of rollout. I think that's rather alarming. So in a limited time, I think that I'd like to suggest with your help to perhaps work with City Council to come up with 3 easy fixes right now. This is in light of what we're seeing in other progressive cities like Mill Valley, Los Altos, Petaluma, I can name a few more, that have ordinances in place that says, 1, minimum distance should be about, for them, is 500 to 1,500 feet. For us right now, it's 100 from schools, but 20 feet from residents. So can we just at least do something logical where it's 100 feet from everything, which is shy of everybody else's standard, but makes our thing somewhat sensible, right? Why schools are not homes where the children sleep and spend more time? And second is that we have a very interesting requirement that says density of cell sites for each carrier cannot be more than 500 feet, closer. But it doesn't preclude other carriers from doing so. So I'd love to see us saying any cell site should be 500 feet apart. Once again, other places are doing 1,500. So can we do something consistent and minimal? And last, the third thing is that, I'm just rushing this, if we can do, some cities are doing, I guess, provisional permits. Do it for 3 years, 4 years, because this is all happening starting now. We don't know what's going on, what the long-term impacts are. We have a chance to review it in 3 to 4 years. So those are the three things I hope that we can bring forth to City Council, where now the City Council's input and the residents' input are factored in for the city manager to do something about this.
You, Peter, I appreciate it. Please feel free to send me an email at rwng@cupertino.org. I'd like to learn more and connect with you. It sounds like there's some ordinances that can be applied or applied if people actually have an input process. Who do we have next? Let's try Rajul Pandit.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Hi, you
Yes.
don't sound like a Rajul, but
Okay.
welcome.
Okay, yeah, I am Rajul Pandit. You pronounced it right. Thank you. I'm a Cupertino
good.
resident. Yeah, I'm a Cupertino resident since 2001. I'm a mother, and my kids have grown up here. And I want to quickly say I completely 100% back and second what Peter just went over very methodically and thoroughly about the concerns of the 5G cell sites. It is astonishing to me. I am new to this concept. I did not know, but I got a flyer from Verizon, which is very, very disturbing that they are going to go and install those sites. And what is our city doing? My big question for you guys is, why does Cupertino have lower standards than the comparing cities in our neighborhood? We should be doing better. We should not be allowing 20, 25 feet for these 5G cell towers. And of course, I use the internet, and of course, I want 5G, but I want it safely for my house, for my family, for my kids. We should not have lower standards in Cupertino than neighboring cities. And the minimum we want is 100 feet minimum. It should be at least that, if not more. And all the other points that Peter said with giving provisional permits only so that we can reevaluate the situation. Absolutely, I'm a very concerned mother, and I hope my voice and my concern will be taken into serious consideration today. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much. Let's go to Tian Hang. Hopefully I pronounced that properly. Tian.
Yeah, can you hear me? All right,
Yep.
Thank you, Vice President. I'm Tian Hen. So I've been a Cupertino resident since 5 years ago, since the moment that I moved to Bay Area. So I'm here today to speak as not only as a Cupertino resident, but as a father of a 8-month boy, and also a representative of 17 infants, toddlers in my community. So again, I want to represent my huge concern for the 5G stations that's going to build near my home. Okay, so this 5G station is going to be 25 feet away from my house. 25 feet is like a length of the minivan. So can you imagine, like, just the size of minivan they're going to emit 24/7 radiation signals to our kids, especially the infants. We have so many infants here, toddlers here, right? And compared to other cities, they are using 1,000 feet. So if you know the physics, our kids is receiving 100,000 times more than the kids in the other cities. The radiation, the amount of radiations, and it's 24/7, right? So I'm really, really concerned. All of my neighbors, they have concern. We're extremely concerned. So because we have so many kids here, and for the 5G station locations, there can be many other choices. There is Crossroad, there is De Anza College. There is so many places we can put the 5G station. Why does Verizon wants to put the station just next to our home? This is unacceptable. So I'm speaking for all of our neighbors, for all the parents of the kids and infants. Okay, so I hope the city can really, consider our concerns. And as Peter Chu just said, we can work with them. We are not saying we don't want 5G. We want 5G. We also want internet, right? It's just the place of the station. They definitely, there is a better place to put those stations instead of just putting in front of your home, right? So yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you, Tien. Let's go to Vera. Vera,
Hi,
just a reminder, you have 3 minutes and
yeah.
address this. Welcome.
So, am I unmuted?
You are muted. We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just want to show my echo and support to what Peter said and the previous speaker said. So basically, I think 25 feet is just too close. So if people think if people say we want a good signal, that is understandable. But if you imagine that a person that if they know that the cell is just installed next to his door, and then I think nobody will choose the choose between these two. It's definitely it safe first. So I think 100 feet to us is a reasonable consideration, and 25 or within 25 is just too close. So yeah, I just want to show my concern and support for the previous speaker. Yeah.
Thank you, Vera. Thank you for expressing that. Let's go to Satish Madato.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good evening, members here. And I think I don't want to repeat exactly the same thing. Like, I've been one of the persons, like actually I got a mail from Verizon as well. It is exactly 25 feet from my bedroom. Okay. That's where it is the corner of my home, practically. And I think, and the neighbors here also is really concerned about it. Like, because I was just going around and there are people ready to even sign up the petitions and, to bring it up to wherever it is needed. And I think I feel that Verizon is really taking a loophole. They are just working on a loophole here, like, having schools in the schools and other public places, it's about 100 feet. And for residents, it's, just about 25 feet. So they're just going 25 or 26 feet kind of things. If you really measure from my bedroom to the pole, what it is here. So I think we should try to have a standard again. And as Peter and others said here, let's standardize that, and it's going to really help us. But I'm really concerned because we have also kids at home, and now we're working from home 24/7 kind of thing. And this is just across of my home. And this is a densely, the resident, the houses around here are very high. And I'm on McClellan. So that area, how it is. So definitely I have a concern. And I don't want to repeat everything, whatever others said that, but please take an action on this. I spoke in, in city council meeting also a couple of times. I met few council members as well. Okay. And thank you for your support.
Thank you, Satish, for being here. We've got Sujata and then Lisa Warren.
Good evening. Can you guys hear me?
Sujata, we hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Sujata Prasad, and I'm a Cupertino resident. I completely agree with what Peter said. It totally makes sense to keep this 5G cells at least 100 feet away from homes. If there's a reason why they are not keeping it close at schools, then it's not even safe for houses, right? Because we do have our kids living at home. It doesn't make sense to live because there is no studies, there's no evidence that these radiations are safe. I live on McClellan Road, and they're planning to install the 5G cell right near my bedroom window, which is like not even 50 feet away from my house. And, it is really concerning because I think initially all cities opposed to this, and they recently won the case against all this. So there is no enough studies, and I don't know how FCC is monitoring the radiations that are being emitted. And for all that we know, these radiations are not safe at all. And, as a concerned citizen, I want to raise my voice There are places on McClellan roads, there are poles right across my house where there is no residence. It is near De Anza College. There are no houses there. I think that is a safer place to put these cells rather than close to where people are living. So that's my concern. It's not that we are against 5G, it's just that we want them to do it safely. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Sujata, thank you for your comments. We will move to Lisa Warren.
Hello. So sadly, all these people that are speaking, it's pretty much been decided by the city what's going to happen. I agree with everything that David said and all the people that are agreeing, quite honestly. I don't understand myself why there weren't stricter guidelines in Cupertino. But I'm not sure that anything can be done about it at this point. And it does warrant asking Deb and council if there is something. But I would add that all the people here speaking had received a letter, and there's something within however many feet Verizon had to send letters going out to people. The people in the city that don't get those notices yet aren't speaking about this yet. But as things roll out and more people get these notices, you're going to get more of this kind of reaction. And I can tell you that there's one close to my house, close enough where I got a letter. And I asked the city about it because my knowledge was that they were going to put them on existing poles, not new poles. But then I learned that in this case, because in this case, it's a brand new all the way up, that was allowed because there was a accommodation for if they're replacing a light that's on an old wooden pole, a utility pole, then they can put a pole up. And I think what they've done in this case is it's very near a high school. And I'm guessing that the existing pole that they could have put it on was closer than 100 feet to the school. So they moved it a little. But now that street's going to have the original pole without a light and this new thing. And it's also being placed in a non-conventional single-family home use. It's homes that house people with disabilities, which seems a little odd to me. And I think a good point and a good argument for possibly changing what's going on is now, and for who knows how long, people's homes are their schools. So the 100 feet should definitely be a minimum, knowing what we know now. So anyway, I'm running out of time, so I will be quiet. I hadn't planned to speak of this because it's not an agenda item, but it is important to a lot of people. And again, I think it may be too late, but I think the questions should still be asked.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you for your comments. I think we have one more. I see Galaxy Tab A 8-inch Jenny. So I'll just say Jenny. I think that's who's on here. I'm not sure who that is. Please come join us and speak.
Yes, Vice Chair Wang. This is Jennifer Griffin. Thank you.
Oh, hi.
Yes, I do have a new computer. Well, maybe not. Yes, interesting about the comments about the Verizon rollout. I will say again, I'm embarrassed now that we have Verizon, but I will say just as an off comment, because I'm going to talk about something else. I am concerned when they talk about 25 feet or 100 feet. We don't know yet the potential genetic damage to the DNA in the body. We just don't know. There's studies, but since everyone is home now, this is going to be 24/7. COVID has changed everything. Getting on to the new situation, I'll just put a plug in for the Embarcadero Center. I have been told that it's a very fine organization and that their studies are as legitimate or more legitimate than Turner's. I think that we need to remember that the California Sacramento is back in session, and Senator Wiener is actively trying to probably roll out some more big housing bills. We need to be aware of this because we know where the money is coming from now, the people who are backing this, big money backers. We need to be aware of what these bills are and what they're trying to do. When they had that church bill roll out, the one that allows churches to build obnoxious housing next to their neighbors without telling them, I thought this is really the epitome of like writing a bill to your own specifications. So I think people are going to be watching what big housing bills are coming out of Sacramento and trying to trace them back to the big money interests. I know I will be. And I think that we need to be aware of this now because look at all the mayhem these housing bills have caused. Also, a lot of them do not reflect what happens with COVID. It's the big unknown. So I'm going to be speaking later on an issue, obviously, we have on the agenda, but the jig is up. The public is not as stupid or gullible as they used to be, and we're watching to see what's coming out of Sacramento. And believe me, I expect these politicians to start waking up and looking around and realizing that the public expects them to protect the state of California and realize that the pandemic has changed a lot of things. But I can guarantee you, we're going to get the same old rhetoric that we did last year, high density, super transit, etc. But we're not buying it anymore. They have to deal with the pandemic and the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. For those listening in, this is Oral Communications, and we've concluded that portion. Sounds like there might be some items for City Council to pay attention to regarding this issue around 5G. And when they do, we can bring it back here when that makes sense. Let's move to item number 2, if that's okay. And item number 2 is presentation by the staff on the transition from LOS, level of service, to vehicle miles traveled, VMT, for the determination of transportation impacts under CEQA, which many know as California Environmental Quality Act, a change required by Senate Bill SB 743. We're going to take a look at the presentation from staff, provide some feedback, and look at the options for selecting a preferred VMT threshold, and in addition to the preferred metric or method of measuring VMT. Let's turn it over to staff.
Thank you.
Director
Thank you,
Fu.
Vice Chair. Thank you, Vice Chair Wong. Today we have a special guest here from the Public Works Department. Chris Corral, the Senior Transportation Planner, will be doing a presentation for you. There's also a number of consultants here as well to answer some of your questions. With that, I will turn over to Chris. Just the quick note is that this had gone through a study session before you. We received some comments and went to City Council, received direction from the Council, and the Council specifically wanted the Public Works team to come back and see if they have any additional input on the changes that they recommended. So with that, I will hand this presentation to Chris.
All right, thank you, Ben, and thank you, commissioners. Thank you all. My name is Chris, and as Ben noted, that we did come to the Planning Commission in September to give more of an informational kind of update on the process. And at that time, we did not quite have the white paper ready. We were about a week off, and it's been published since then and is included in the packet. After that, we went to City Council and got some good feedback from Council. And with that feedback, helped formulate recommendations that are now included in the staff report, staff recommendations. And our plan is to gather your feedback this evening on those recommendations, and then return to Planning Commission at a future meeting with an actual ordinance. And the ordinance would have our VMT thresholds and other decisions that you'll be making tonight that will codify it in our Cupertino zoning, in our municipal code. And then we would go on to council for adoption. So let's see, the one thing I wanted to note before I pass this on to our consultant team for the presentation is that in the, there's one area that we don't really have a recommendation formulated on yet. We're interested in getting your feedback on this. And this is the idea of what's called VMT screening, which is essentially another word for exemption. Some cities have chosen to exempt certain types of projects from VMT review, and that may be certain types of projects like affordable housing projects. There may be other types of supportive housing that cities might want to exempt that are located in, for example, low VMT areas. So we'll be interested to get your feedback on that this evening, and we'll use that moving forward. Let me see. This evening, we're joined by 3 individuals from Fair and Peers, our consultant team, Teresa Winery, Dan Rubin, and Julie Morgan. Teresa will be leading the presentation, and we'll all be answering questions. Also, David Stillman, the transportation manager, is with us this evening to answer your questions. And that wraps up my introduction. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Teresa Winery of Fair and Peers, who will lead us.
Thank you, Chris. Good evening, commissioners. As Chris mentioned, my name is Teresa Winery. I'm a transportation planner with Fair and Peers Transportation Consultants, and have been working with Dan Rubens and Julie Morgan also on this call to provide the technical documentation for the SB 743 transition in Cupertino. So let me go ahead and share my screen. So we've prepared a short slide deck today. As was mentioned, this has come before the Planning Commission via study session previously. And in that study session, we went through a slightly more technically detailed overview of the process, the requirements of the law, and some of the policy decisions that will need to be made. We gave a similar presentation to City Council upon submittal of the draft white paper, which should be included in your packet. Just to give you a general sense of the intent of the white paper is to provide all of the technical documentation. As such, it's a bit dry, we do understand, and it includes a high amount of technical detail, as well as really presenting all of the options available to any city looking to adopt a VMT impact threshold under CEQA. The purpose of this presentation and what we've tried to do is really distill things down into some key takeaways, some action items, and we'll spend most of our time kind of diving into the various recommendations and screening options available for Cupertino. So I want to start with just going real quick through some key takeaways from this presentation. And this is sort of the high level overview of the purpose of this white paper and this recommendation. So ultimately, changes in state law are requiring CEQA review to evaluate transportation impacts using vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, rather than level of service. So for decades, most transportation analysis that for environmental review for most jurisdictions in California has used level of service. You're all familiar with it, provides a letter grade based on the amount of vehicular delay at individual intersections or road segments. Because of the passage of SB 743 and its implementation beginning on July 1st, 2020, level of service is no longer allowed to be used for determining CEQA impacts. And the recommended metric from the state is vehicle miles traveled. VMT is a new metric for the transportation section of CEQA, but we already use it for the air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, and noise analysis. It's a standard item that we tend to prepare, but generally haven't reported through the transportation section previously. So we wanted to kind of convey that transportation analysis for CEQA and for new projects will continue to use many of the same tools that we'd used previously, but we'll be reporting different outputs in order to get to those VMT tables. So some of those tools include the Institute of Transportation Engineers Trip Generation Manuals. So that's kind of the standard for determining for small to medium projects how much traffic intensity would be related to them. The VTA travel demand forecasting model, which is of somewhat increased importance with VMT. So the VTA model is a complicated piece of software that essentially takes the entire 9-county Bay Area region, plus Santa Cruz, Monterey, and San Benito counties, and attempts to simulate every trip made by every individual to and from schools, work, retail, any sort of land use over a typical weekday. And that's the primary tool that we use for finding VMT. It's also the primary tool that's been in use for years in order to do future year forecasts. So this is the same tool that we would use if we were trying to project cumulative conditions under CEQA for LOS purposes on individual roadways. It's also the sort of tool that we would previously use to do individual project analysis for very large or complicated projects. So something like the Apple II campus would have a high level of modeling complexity, and we would usually use something like this tool in addition to all of our usual kind of trip generation methods. There's also the MTC maintained regional model. So this model is less likely to be used for local projects, but is of some import because it's used to determine the greenhouse gas emission goals and the overall regional averages under the Sustainable Communities Strategy. And then, of course, we'll always want to use local data where we have it. So if we have information on the types of trip lengths and trip purposes and traffic intensity for a local area, we prefer to use that to any of these kind of other sources. In addition, the city can continue to evaluate projects for their effects on LOS as part of assessing general plan compliance. So this will have to happen outside of the CEQA process moving forward. Your general plan does set LOS standards. Generally speaking, you have a citywide standard of D, so LOSD, with a small number of intersections having a standard of LOS E+, I believe. So those are already set in the general plan. They will not change under this process, and they can still be, and a project's effects on that level of service should still be able to be assessed under the discretionary review process. Finally, just kind of a quick summary of the sorts of actions that are going to be requested today. So the commission is intended to receive this presentation, recommend to council VMT reduction thresholds for land use projects and plans, a VMT impact threshold for transportation projects, and then screening guidance to identify which projects, if any, will be exempt from a more detailed VMT analysis. Most projects will still need to provide some sort of qualitative discussion of their VMT effects, but there is some guidance from the state as well as in CEQA statute that talks about situations where you may have a less detailed discussion of that. These recommendations will then be transmitted to the council, and the process that Chris talked through earlier will begin to kind of get it into law. All right, so with that, we're going to start diving into the complexities of setting a VMT threshold. So one key resource that many cities have been using in setting this threshold is a technical advisory issued by the state's Office of Planning and Research. So this technical advisory was intended to be guidance for local agencies to implement this kind of change to the CEQA process. And overall, the state's guidance for those thresholds is built off of this idea of meeting the statewide greenhouse gas reduction targets. So I think we've shared these graphs previously, but generally speaking, the state projects that the population of California will continue to grow, and that if left to kind of business as usual, that VMT would also continue to grow. So population growth is that blue line, projected VMT with no interventions is that red line. With the state's greenhouse gas emissions goals, there is some capacity to have some increase in VMT growth. So that incorporates all of the Air Resource Board's projections with respect to fuel efficiency, vehicle fleet electrification, and generally being able to get more mileage out of a lesser amount of fossil fuels. However, that growth is substantially less than the total projected population growth. So by 2050, the state projects a 24% increase in population compared to 2010, with the capacity for VMT growth being only 6.5%. And when we take that and put it on a per capita basis to kind of help us assess what sort of VMT rate we should be looking for, given that we suspect that some population growth will occur, Once you normalize that for the population growth, you see that you really need a 14.3% reduction from existing conditions set 2015 to 2018 roughly, in order to reach that, that target by 2050. So that's the general rationale behind OPR's recommendation for a 15% reduction, is that that's roughly what would be needed in order to reach the goals that we've set for ourselves by 2050, assuming that we have the population growth and the overall kind of economic growth that we would expect in California. However, as a lead agency, the City of Cupertino has discretion to adopt a VMT impact threshold based on substantial evidence and your own local priorities. So that is a key aspect of CEQA law. The white paper that we've included in the meeting agenda summarizes essentially the entire list of options. And you'll notice that most of them involve assessing a per capita VMT, so similar to the methods interpreted by OPR, and comparing that to an existing citywide average. So the intention here is to really look at the rate of VMT that's being created by new development, and assessing whether that development is really efficient VMT-wise. Does it on average generate less VMT than the existing built environment in Cupertino? So what we've done is we've kind of set forth 4 options for setting these thresholds based on specific analysis of the model outputs for the City of Cupertino itself. So these are based on taking that general rationale from the state of how to kind of meet your overall greenhouse gas reductions, looking at the BTA model's outputs for the City of Cupertino, what the overall regional projections are, and coming up with specific numbers that reflect kind of 4 general options here. The first one would be to have VMT continue to increase roughly proportional to population. So this option takes a look at what sort of VMT growth and population growth would be projected under your general plan. This is essentially business as usual. This is if you increased, if you built up to your general plan by 2050 and the rest of the Bay Area continued to develop according to its adopted general plans by 2050, what sort of effects would we have? The second is to maybe slow that growth rate of VMT. So you would have VMT increase, but at a slower rate than otherwise. And this would be intended to kind of tamp down a little bit of that VMT growth and look at perhaps slowing it a little bit with the understanding that VMT growth, while VMT is a metric, looks beyond just the city boundaries of Cupertino, it is related to the amount of traffic congestion that you'll see on your streets. So in order to kind of slow the growth of that traffic congestion, you can look at a more intense VMT reduction requirement for significant impacts under CEQA. The third is looking at to keep total city generated VMT stable even with population growth. So this looks at what rate would be necessary in order to maintain your current level of traffic that you have on your streets today, generally speaking, without necessarily accounting for the full effect of pass-through, while still maintaining development growth. And the fourth one being to try to decrease the total city generated VMT. So generally speaking, we've got kind of some very simplified graphics here that, again, the idea here is just to look at what the per capita rate reduction is. So a less per capita rate, so people continue to act roughly the same as they do today, leads to more growth as you add more population, both in Cupertino and throughout the region. In order to reduce that growth, even with population growth, you need a more stringent VMT reduction standard. And now we get into some general numbers. Again, these are all based on model outputs. So this is the VTA model outputs for 2015 baseline and 2040 cumulative year for the city of Cupertino. And I'll kind of walk through each of these lines. So baseline, under 2015 conditions with 2015 land use and transportation network, the VTA model estimates that the city of Cupertino generates around 3.2 million VMT per day. So that number consists of all of the trips that have at least one end in Cupertino. So either residents who start their trip at home and then drive to work in Palo Alto or San Jose would be included, but as well as individuals who maybe live in Santa Clara and drive to Cupertino to shop or eat at a restaurant. That is intended to include all of the city-generated VMT. When you divide that per person, and here per person, we mean the sum of the residents and employees in Cupertino. And the reason we use the sum of residents and employees is because for modeling purposes, those are the variables that really drive that generated VMT number. So those are kind of the two primary land use variables that generate that VMT. So this gives us a rough efficiency metric.
Teresa, may I jump in with a quick question?
Of course.
So what do you do if like you have how do you have the employee count? Does it include the people that are actually in the office? Does it include people working from home? Is there a factor to adjust for that?
Yes, so the employee count is generally the best estimate of land use planners at any given time. So it tends to be based on a combination of economic forecasts, general plans, a knowledge of how many square footage of office there are, and it is an estimate. So I don't want to say that they know specifically exactly how many people were working in Cupertino in 2015. Employee counts generally include a full day's worth of employees, or the total number of people employed at a location, even if they might not work every day, if it's retail, if they're commuting at off-peak hours, and it divides those employees into different employment types to kind of account for some of that. So retail employees, for instance, have a different travel pattern than office employees. And the way that we calibrate this is through a lot of individual checks. So whenever modeling staff are looking at these baseline 2015 numbers, one of the reasons that we're still looking at 2015 as baseline is because we have data from 2015. We didn't necessarily have data or good data from 2020 and 2020. And that allows us to look at things like how many vehicles were on individual roadways compared to what the model projects. What is the vehicle mode share in a given census tract compared to what the model projects? And a whole number of different things in order to calibrate that model and make sure that we're being as accurate as possible, even though every model is imperfect, but some are useful, is kind of the line of thinking.
Thank you.
Of course. So that's sort of the baseline that we're starting from. If we want to look at the 4 options, the first one is really predicated on your existing general plan. So if you grow according to your general plan, which is also the growth projected in the existing VTA model, then you would have a overall 17.8% increase in VMT, but also some increase in efficiency when you look at that on a per person basis. And that's just based on regional growth patterns, general efficiencies that come about with increased density of both employment and residents. There's a lot of different factors that work into the model, but that would be roughly in line with your general plan as it is now. If you wanted to look at kind of capping your increase in city-generated VMT to match that OPR projection of 6.5%, then we would be looking at the equivalent of a 14.4% reduction per capita. Again, if you had the same population coming in as projected in your general plan. If you wanted to keep your total VMT stable, then the corresponding rate would be around a 20% reduction from that baseline number in 2015. And if you wanted to attempt to reduce VMT by 10 to 12%, then you're looking at close to a 30% reduction in city-generated VMT per person. So those are the general options that we've kind of pulled out, again, based on overall growth patterns per the city of Cupertino specifically. And all of these would be compared just based to a citywide generation rate. In addition, as mentioned, there are some exceptions or screening criteria that essentially lead to presumed less than significant impacts based on VMT. So we're going to talk through a few of these. The big one, and the one that is included specifically in CEQA statute. So this is sort of the strongest level of language around these screening criteria, is that CEQA statute reads that projects within 1/2 mile of a high quality transit corridor, which in Cupertino is much of Stevens Creek Boulevard, due to the level of bus service, should be presumed to have a less than significant impact. OPR provides some guidance for factors that may lead to that presumption, to fail, which amount to things such as having a very low density development, having a high rate of parking, having, as well as some other factors that might lead to a higher level of VMT per capita than would be typical in the area. The next slide kind of shows roughly what that radius looks like based solely on the VTA screening tool. So the VTA has developed a countywide tool that allows you to look at existing model outputs, basically for each individual zone within the model. And it also includes this overlay for high quality transit corridors. In Cupertino, the area highlighted here in this sort of beige is considered to be a high quality transit corridor under VTA's definition. We have seen some jurisdictions adopt slightly different interpretations of this 1/2 mile radius or high quality transit corridor. City of Redwood City has adopted a 1/4 mile radius as their preference. And other cities have specifically indicated that the distance should be measured in terms of walkability. So if you have, say, a cul-de-sac, then you may not actually be within 1/2 mile walking distance between a building and a bus stop. So those are just kind of a few considerations that other cities have looked at. But again, this is language that is included in CEQA statute. In addition, there are other exceptions, both those named in statute as well as exceptions that are listed in the OPR guidance. So of those named in statute, the first one is 100% affordable housing projects. The second one is small projects, which are generally exempt from CEQA analysis. So those that generate fewer than 110 daily vehicle trips, as well as transportation projects that do not add additional VMT. So there's a long list of transportation projects that have a categorical exemption, and then a few additional that are called out as potentially not adding additional VMT by both CEQA statute and the OPR guidance. In addition, OPR guidance lists 2 additional potential exceptions, one of which is local serving retail of below 50,000 square feet, as well as projects in low VMT areas. So these 2 exceptions I wanted to talk about a little bit more, just because we have seen other jurisdictions change that threshold for local serving retail. Palo Alto, I believe, has chosen instead a size of roughly 30,000 square feet in order to be defined as local serving retail. In addition, projects in low VMT areas are generally considered by the OPR guidance to be areas in zones of the model that have, on average, under existing conditions, VMT per capita that's 15% below the regional or county average. However, Cupertino in general has higher rates of VMT and would have very limited numbers of low VMT areas. And so this is less of a concern for the city of Cupertino. And because of that very fact, Cupertino is a higher VMT location, which means that under this change, most projects will likely have significant and unavoidable impacts based on transportation and VMT. There is mitigation available for VMT impacts, largely in the form of transportation demand management, or TDM, but also changes to the overall city and transportation network, changes in regional policies. Regional transit changes might lead to overall reductions in VMT, but these regional strategies, which also include topics such as VMT banks and exchanges, are generally still being discussed and are not yet widely considered to be feasible options for mitigation. So moving forward, for many development projects in Cupertino, you'll likely find a significant impact based on VMT. The maximum feasible mitigation will likely take the form of a TDM program, so something such as providing transit passes, marketing, overall commuter benefits, shuttles for employers, However, even with those interventions, many projects will likely have a significant and unavoidable impact with mitigation. In addition, we wanted to touch briefly on the future of LOS analysis for new development. So everything that I just discussed really applies to CEQA analysis. The city can again include LOS analysis to assess general plan compliance through the discretionary review process. And then the standards for performing and documenting this analysis can be developed through staff level action. So we have the requirements for level of service that are set in the general plan and would be updated with an update to your general plan circulation element. And the overall standards for kind of doing and performing this analysis have traditionally followed the VTA's guidelines. And staff or at council direction could potentially look at kind of formalizing those guidelines, looking at what a non-CEQA transportation analysis looks like for the city of Cupertino, and just thinking through what documentation would be necessary. There will likely be some changes in the general language based on this kind of change in the legal basis for the analysis. So for instance, you might have projects that are now identifying deficiencies and having conditions of approval to build improvements rather than having the previous kind of impacts based on LOS and mitigation measures that address vehicle delay. And with that, I'll leave it with any questions, and I'm happy to talk through anything that you might have questions about.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, staff. Let's see if council members have any questions for fair peers as well as the city staff.
I have a question, Commissioner.
Commissioner Takahashi, go ahead.
Yeah, so it sounds like other municipalities were surveyed from the standpoint of elements that they've modified with regard to adoption. Is there a pretty comprehensive list of that in terms of, you mentioned Palo Alto's reduction of the square footage, as well as there was one other one that escapes my mind, but it would be interesting to just see what the main concerns were. Each city has its own unique elements that drive the decisions with regard to the planning process, and so it'd just be interesting to understand where Mountain View versus Sunnyvale and Santa Clara viewed and enough or assessed enough to make change recommendations.
Mm-hmm. I would say that in general, and this is speaking largely from experience, I don't think that we have documented kind of a comprehensive matrix that goes through all of the changes that various cities have made. Many cities have adopted sort of the OPR technical advisory and just indicated that they will use that to guide any and all of their decisions. Where cities have ventured away from that, there have been a couple of trends that we've noticed. The first one being kind of really defining that high quality transit area. And there have definitely been several cities that have changed that, again, either on walkable distance or in the case of Redwood City, changing the radius, as well as providing maybe guidance on when, in addition to OPRs, on when that presumption of less than significant should not exist, whenever there should be additional analysis required. In addition to that, I'd say that one of the things that we've kind of touched on, but didn't go into depth in this presentation, is most cities are looking at a reduction compared to baseline, but are setting that baseline based on different geographies. So some cities are comparing themselves to themselves, so that would be based on the citywide baseline. Others are comparing themselves to the regional baseline. The OPR guidance states that you can use either, but that if you're using the citywide baseline, then you may also need to check for compliance with your regional sustainable communities strategy.
So I think what I heard is generally speaking, most of our neighbors are trying to adopt what I would call, I guess, more aggressive elements to drive VMT down, generally speaking. right?
I,
That's what I
I
heard.
think that that's generally a fair assessment. I do know also that in terms of novel approaches, Dan has been working with City of Los Gatos, and they're taking kind of more of a VMT budget approach. Dan, do you want to speak to that real quick?
Sure, I can speak to that for just a moment. And Los Gatos is in a location in our valley at the very edge of the urban area. It's primarily served by vehicles. There's very little transit, and so and they tend to generate VMT at a higher rate than a comparable city like downtown San Jose or Santa Clara. So their approach is, as they're updating their general plan, to define their VMT specific to their community goals around greenhouse gas emissions, air quality, and other kind of economic and quality community goals. And so they ultimately are defining their specific VMT to achieve those goals. So they're setting a citywide threshold.
So question on that, just from the standpoint of if you utilize emissions as one of the key elements to appending to VMT, there has to be some assumption of electric vehicle adoption and greenhouse gas emissions associated with generation of energy to support electric vehicles. Just, is there a kind of a broad assumption there, or is there a complicated assumption?
Yeah.
Just
there's
curious.
a complicated assumption.
Okay.
Those projections are prepared by the California Air Resource Board. So they do look at kind of what they call the overall emissions factors for vehicles looking forward to 2050. They have kind of year by year assessments of what the statewide fleet composition will look like, as well as they primarily perform their analysis by on the statewide level, on the air basin level, and then on the county level. So unfortunately, there's not really good data on an individual city by city level. And I can't recall off the top of my head what they currently estimate the EV penetration rate to be by 2050.
Okay, well, that's interesting, right? Because EV adoption is going to be dramatically different in urban and versus rural areas, as well as I think the general wealth of a city tends to probably drive higher EV adoption as well.
Yes.
So that's not taken into account in any way. Then it sounds like.
In
other words, you'd expect more EVs in Los Gatos quicker than in
Precisely.
San Joaquin.
I believe, and I'm not an expert, unfortunately, on the impact forecasting process, but I do believe that there are some socioeconomic variables because they vary the fleet, the kind of like fleet depreciation and adoption rate from county to county. But again, that would be on a county-wide level. So that would be for Santa Clara County as opposed to for Cupertino specifically.
And I'll just add, I think Los Gatos adopted a threshold that's supportive of the state goals for GHG emissions. So the rate that Teresa showed about increasing about 6.5% as kind of the maximum increase for the town of Los Gatos is their goal. So the associated cleaning of the vehicle fleet that's needed to achieve that goal it's assumed in that threshold. So it's similar to the threshold 2 that Teresa presented in this presentation.
So are there any ramifications associated with not being aligned to the state's goals as a city?
I'm not certain that I know the specific answer to that. I think that that's certainly a question probably for your city attorney.
Okay. I mean, seems like something we should understand as we weigh in on a decision with regard to, levels that we're contemplating tonight.
The CEQA standard is that you're required to have substantial evidence for whichever thresholds you put forth that they represent a significant or less than significant impact to the physical environment. So there's a lot of individual interpretation around those key phrases, but generally speaking, substantial evidence is considered to be facts or reasonable assumptions based on facts.
Right. Assumption would be, though, the farther you vary from state goals, the stronger your assumptions and facts need to be to stand up to and defend your limits.
Again, I'd likely want to defer to your city attorney on that one, but.
Right. Thanks.
Actually, to add to Commissioner Takahashi's questions, really on baselines, I do have a good point there. I understand the war on the internal combustion engine and the car, unfortunately, are related. But as we move to EVs, right? I mean, who determines that number on the back end? Is it something that we calculate on our own that you guys are doing for us, or in terms of EV penetration or potential like alternative energy vehicle penetration?
So in terms of the numbers presented as options here, we've taken kind of the standardized state baselines. So looking at a statewide average. So currently those percentages do not necessarily incorporate EV adoptions that might be above average in Cupertino.
Okay, because we have probably one of the highest EV registration rates in the state of California, from what I remember, in terms of by zip code analysis. So it may be something to factor in. So, and by 2025, I think we don't have a choice, is it, or 2030? I can't remember. This should be all EV. So I think those numbers are on a 2015 baseline basis. You might want to take a look at it again, just in case, because the assumptions that we have for VMT and VMT growth with increasing population, but less emissions being produced in GHG might actually turn out to be beneficial. Commissioner Fung, I think you're trying to say something.
Sure, I had some questions. If we're done with that section, so I'll start with an easy one. One of the criteria for our categorical exemption was less than 110 car trips per day. Building projects that have less than 110 car trips per day. Can you give us a rough size? Like what is a apartment building that generates roughly that number?
Yeah, so that would be around 11 single family homes and up to, I think, 18, 19, 20 apartment homes.
Okay, great. So not really that small relative to what we do in Cupertino. Great. I'm interested in, so I like your presentation about how the 4 scenarios were developed. And I had a little bit of a question about the presentation, and this actually appears in the staff report, that the baseline was calculated on a kind of a, well, I guess it was the per capita VMT of 34 miles per resident. The continued growth model was actually run out. Of course, there's a inconsistency between the baseline number because that's based on a much smaller population than the relatively constant population that was in the other scenarios. So I'm curious, there was a 5.3% reduction to 32.2 in the continued growth model. Was that, you had actually commented that there was there was a forward-looking expectation of possible VMT reduction that comes independent of doing anything else. Is that 5.3% or?
Yes, so that is the current 2040 projection under the growth of your general plan. And much of that efficiency comes from a combination of growth in Cupertino and growth in the surrounding area. So I think if I looked, I just looked it up, your what we call service population. So the overall total denominator there is your residents plus your employees. So it does take into account the employment intensity in addition to the residential intensity. And that increases by around 20 to 25,000 individuals, a mix of residents and employees under your general plan into the future and under the regional projections. So some of that decrease is just due to the efficiencies that come with density. If you add more people in general, they're going to be closer to more things in general. So even if people are largely still driving, they might have slightly shorter trips. In addition, there are regional changes that are taking place. So development in your surrounding communities, increased housing near jobs, as well as improvements in the public transportation system over time, all have kind of slight effects that add up to that efficiency.
Okay. Yeah. So I would just say to keep things from being, perhaps that's not meaningful, but to keep things as an apple to apple comparison. Yeah, I did the calculation as well. Most of the four scenarios with 2040 population, you're talking about 118,000, residents plus workers, and that's up from 95,000 basically.
Yes.
So is that number at 117, 118,000 workers and 34 miles of generated VMT per capita? Is that not a meaningful number? When I initially looked at this report, it looked to me like that number, that quite a lot higher. That's 24% higher than what we have currently. A total of about 4 million. VMT.
I see. So
is that not a meaningful number because gas economy gets better and there's more electric adoption viewed to be in the future years?
So all of these are solely VMT. So these are agnostic about EV adoption. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. With respect to the overall growth, as I indicated, we use these kind of really, the VTA model is a very complicated model. It includes a lot of different inputs, and realistically speaking, that growth would not happen overnight. So we want to try to incorporate some of those other changes that would happen by 2040 when we're looking at that population increase. But yes, that would be roughly the size of the VMT increase if nothing changed and people acted exactly the same and traveled the same distances despite the growth.
So it's okay. I guess I'm getting kind of the message here. That the 5.3% reduction that was in the continued growth model, that's something that's viewed to be pretty achievable as a natural cause of the things that happen over the next 20 years.
Correct. So that is kind of the business as usual assumption with the regional growth and the changes to the transportation network that are currently slated to occur by 2040.
Great. Another thing that I'd like to ask, put in as a recommendation, and this touches on Commissioner Takahashi's point a little bit. A number of communities around us have already gone through this path and identified how they're going to apply VMT. And so I think it would be useful, even though at this early state, to have a summary of what the targets were. I think that the recommendation here was for a reduction by 14.4%, which is pretty much 15% when we're talking about this kind of thing. But I would be curious to know who aimed, higher than that, and who was at 15%, who was lower. I think that would be a useful piece of information to help guide the council. And then I wanted to ask a little more complicated question that actually touches back on something that had come up in our previous study session, and that was when you build a Costco. I mean, that was the example here we talked about. When you build a Costco, that may cause, it can be viewed to be a regional attraction. So you may cause more people to come in from other communities to shop there. And you may find that people in our community drive less to go there. And I noticed in the white paper, there was actually a comment about grocery stores. And so I'm curious to understand, just at a high level, how is that calculation treated? To understand, and maybe Costco may not be a good example because it's so large, but it would not qualify for any of the kind of exemptions or considerations. So a 50,000 square foot store is still a large store. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit. What is the mechanism through which that calculation happens? And then, that happens as well with homes. If you build a lot of homes, then you could say, well, people who live in those homes will travel less to go to work in town, but they may not work in town. And so then I wonder, is there a factor that causes that to become an increase in VMT?
Okay, so a couple of questions there. We'll start with the retail stuff. So for your typical grocery store, that's going to that's kind of the specific example that falls under that 50,000 square foot local serving retail example. As per the white paper, the general theory there is that if you have a use that's local serving, the need to go buy groceries is roughly fixed. And so people will, generally speaking, go to the closest available place to buy groceries. There's outliers for that, but this is kind of a generalization that tends to hold true for averages in general. So that's the precise intent of that 50,000 square foot exemption in the OPR guidance. Once we get to retail above that size, the OPR recommendation for a threshold is that you have no net new VMT within the study area. So that's kind of the quantitative version of that same logic, which is that you're reshuffling people around, but you're not actually generating new trips. Unfortunately, like with the way that many of the models work, that's a very difficult threshold to reach. So typically what you would do is you would run your model without the land use and with your grocery stores elsewhere, and then run the model with that grocery store in place. So you would add retail in a given zone. And then you would subtract the VMT in like your study area from the two and see if there's a net increase. So that's the general process for that calculation. And from that net increase, you would see, well, what's the rough effect of this grocery store on a larger level? Grocery stores and retail do tend to be one of the trickier land uses to analyze based on this per person metric, just because so much of the VMT is generated by people who are neither residents nor employees, particularly if you're talking about a Costco, for instance. So those are trickier to analyze. We have a few methods that we can use to look at them, but generally speaking, that's the rationale behind the OPR guidance on that particular threshold.
Okay. So is there something, if you look in the ITE manual, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
is there some sort of exchange factor, or is this beyond the scope of what the ITE
There is not yet some sort of exchange factor from the IT manual. So the typical travel demand model uses sort of these like gravity calculations, where every individual household has a certain number of desires to go get groceries, and based on the distribution of the distance, they'll go to this versus that zone. And it just does that calculation, you know, millions of times. And comes out to a rough average. But that's, there's no, unfortunately, rules of thumb beyond this kind of qualitative discussion for your smaller retail land uses.
So this is something that I guess over time, as more people are doing this analysis and are building
Mm-hmm.
things and observing, then that will just be something that gets refined over time.
Precisely. This is, using VMT in this way is still new. So we certainly generate total VMT for retail centers all the time. That's much easier because you use your standard ITE trip generations and an average trip length for a shopping trip. Those are both pieces of data that we have. It's once you're comparing it to a per capita metric and trying to see what the overall effect is that you get into really needing to use a travel demand model in order to do that analysis.
Yeah, I'm totally neutral. I think a lot of people have feelings one way or the other about Costco. I'm totally neutral about it. But what I would be concerned about is because there doesn't exist a clear exchange factor,
Mm-hmm.
it seems like that very easily can fall into a category where you would have a mitigation issue, for them to be able to consider doing something like that, unless they got into an exemption area, which would generally not be possible. And I would also comment that grocery stores and Costco have the large parking lot problem too. So those are both issues. And then I had one final question, and this one may actually be to a wider audience than just you on this. So I'm curious if you could speak to how LOS would be used as a consideration in a project approval. Post last July.
Yeah, I might defer to your city staff to talk through that. Yeah. Generally speaking, again, it would need to happen through the discretionary review process as part of a review of general plan compliance is the big picture. different cities have approached the details in different ways. Most of them that have kind of undergone the full process now have kind of a bifurcated system where you provide your CEQA analysis, and then you also provide what's called a local, in many cases, like a local transportation assessment or a local traffic assessment or a circulation study that usually looks at a smaller number of intersections closer to the site. But again, that's one of those items where I think I would defer to your city staff for what they would prefer to review and have the analysis done in the future.
Yeah, I hope somebody will grab that question. And I guess what I'm really interested in understanding here is if a project were to be proposed, which met the VMT VMT standards, which with whatever mitigations were required there, what was viewed to have a strong impact on the LOS. I mean, this is exactly the case that the OPR is aiming for here. So I'm wondering what the considerations are. Can you does the city have the right or not have the right to ask for mitigations to LOS traffic impacts as part of an approval?
So I guess I could speak to that briefly. One of the things we'll have to do with this process after we have the council's adopted the recommendations is we'll need to update our checklist for planners so that the submittal of a transportation analysis is included as a checklist item. And getting to your question about the how we basically handle it, it's handled as a condition of compliance with the general plan. And as Teresa mentioned in her presentation, we wouldn't call it necessarily mitigations or we'd get away from using that kind of terminology. But consistency with the general plan holds regardless. I hope that answers your question. What we'll have some work to do to update documents after this is adopted, and we'll be working with the planning department to make sure to get everything dialed in. For lack of
we can come back to this in deliberation. I guess I'm concerned. There's an intent here. There's an intent here with this law, and I would hope that we are compliant with the intent. That there's always value in understanding, under the old standard, what would the impact have been. But the problem is if something went from being, D to F minus, there's a question here as to whether you could ask as part of the approval of that project, whether you could ask that to be addressed. It's pretty clear that the VMT standard is saying, that you cannot, or at least you can't as part of the CEQA impact.
Yeah, we will have to return to update our LOS guidelines within the coming year as a result of this.
Okay. Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Fung. Commissioner Takahashi, I think you've got one more, and then we'll move to Commissioner Saxena.
Couple quick ones. Just a question about the model, the complex model. Does it take into account, with regard to added office, the cost of living locally versus the jobs that are being added, and have some algorithm that, right, given the very high cost of living in Cupertino, adding office space, depending on if it's a software company versus something else, would have a huge impact in terms of how far people are going to have to commute to attend that office. Is that in any way taken into account in the modeling?
I'm going to ask Dan to field that question because he has worked with the VTA model specifically much more often than I have.
Yeah, the short answer is yes, it does. So basically it has to do with household income. And as your household income changes, your travel patterns will change. You may be more likely to travel by vehicle than by transit. You have perhaps access to more vehicles as you travel. So it does take that into account.
Thanks. And one last one. What are the ramifications of being overly aggressive in terms of the reductions? Just, from the standpoint of the direction we're setting in future projects. And
I would say that generally speaking, a more aggressive reduction threshold will lead to more findings of significant and unavoidable impacts, even with all feasible mitigation. So in terms of what we've seen so far in my professional experience, that tends to lead to new developments will likely require a statement of overriding considerations in order to have approval under the CEQA process. And B, the defining which mitigations are feasible can become a tricky issue with many developers. So really thinking through what does it mean to have a fully feasible mitigation measure when you're requiring, say, transit passes provided for the next 40 years, per se. Many developers are not necessarily willing to have that, to kind of absorb that cost.
so that's fascinating because, right, isn't that somewhat contrary to the efforts to expand housing and make projects easier to, approve? So those are kind of going in different directions. In other words, if you establish a very aggressive VMT reduction goals, you would have more grounds to disqualify more projects and thereby essentially establish a slow growth approach to an extent. Is that kind of an unintended consequence?
I would say that CEQA is a disclosure process.
Right.
So it's really to disclose the potential impacts on the environment. It is not meant to stop economic growth. So that's what its purpose is. So it would mean a more extensive environmental process, but that ultimately there's a decision that others are making about the feasibility of a project, depending on outcomes like that you just described.
Yep. Okay.
Hey, Commissioner Takahashi, let's move to Commissioner Saxena if you've got any questions to ask staff and our consultants here.
I have a more of a process question. I'm sorry, my internet is dropping, so I've been in and out, and my video is off because of that. So in terms of the recommendations which you have listed for this, is there a big range and you want us to decide between those, or could you sort of add more thoughts on that, in terms of the choices we have, and what exactly are you recommending we vote on today? And specifically, I wanted to get a sense of what different council planning commission members feel about those choices, because I think this is so. That was my question to the staff.
Do you want me to take that, Teresa?
Yes, please.
Yeah, sure. Could you bring up the slide that had the 4 options? To answer your last question first, Commissioner, the council did not really express opinions or any really feedback on these recommendations. You're really seeing these first. In this council study session, the presentation took up the majority of the time, and we did not have a lot of time to deliberate, but they made it clear that they really valued the Planning Commission's input. So they have not seen really, they have seen this, but they didn't express any opinions, rather. Going to the other parts of your question, what we're really looking for, and it is included in the staff report. The staff recommendations, we really need to have the % reduction targets, and our recommendation is based on what our neighboring communities around us are doing and what we think is feasible in terms of the mitigation options that Teresa went over. And then the other areas we have recommendations are, for example, the how we measure VMT, and there are two methods. There are actually been two methods. There are a lot of methods how you can measure VMT, and so that is another area. But the most critical one really is the VMT reduction, the % reduction targets. And so the scenario that we are recommending is the CARB scenario, the California Air Resources Board scenario. And that is the second option, which still would enable projects to mitigate their VMT, but it would still be challenging. You can see this is the slide, the second option here, where there's a 14.4% change in the city generating VMT per person, with some moderate amount of increase in baseline VMT that is projected over time. Sure.
Thank you. Commissioner Wong, do you have a sense of what different commissioners are feeling about this recommendation? Or should we talk about that specifically?
I think we'll get to that. I still have got a bunch of questions to ask, and then I was going to take a quick break in case people actually have a bio break. But hold on.
Okay.
So, and I'm sure my questions are going to spur some additional questions as well. And then we've got public comment coming as well. So let's do that. If you got do you have any more questions, Commissioner Saxena?
No, I don't have. I think I'm more curious to hear about like the preferences we have, because typically I would like to go with the staff recommendation. And I wanted to get a sense of how other commissioners feel about it, because it has got its pros and cons. And that's about it, because this is a complex topic, and not everything can be captured or understood while we're deliberating on the podium. Thank you.
No, it's a great point. And I actually wanted to do that to help clarify some questions and assumptions I think the public would ask as well. So first of all, thank you for a wonderful presentation and some great weekend reading of 177 pages, I would say.
Scintillating material, I know.
Scintillating for transportation geeks. It was great. I sat down with a couple of friends reading that, and they were asking me what I was doing. So let's start with this. A couple things, couple assumptions, and I think I know the answers to these, but I just want them stated for the public record. Nothing precludes the city from using LOS as well with VMT. Is that correct?
So that is correct. However, LOS cannot be used for CEQA analysis or determination of significant impacts.
Correct. And that's what's in the bill. Okay. But we can mandate that LOS also be used with VMT side by side for our own personal benchmarking to understand, even though we can't use as a reason to deny a project on CEQA grounds, correct?
Correct. That is my understanding.
Okay. So what are the implications of high VMT on housing and housing allocation? Do you know anything about that?
Can you, in terms of regional level recommendations on housing allocations, or in terms of determining where to place housing within Cupertino, or the overall VMT effects?
Well, yeah, we're using VMT as a baseline metric for a lot of housing policy, just like we're using transportation corridors to create different types of housing policy. And, I would ask the other questions. Well, what's the implications of a low VMT on housing bills and housing strategy as well? Because we've got this VMT metric, right? Total city generated VMT, and we've got this, city generated VMT per person. And I'm trying to figure out, what's the impact, right? So if we've got low VMT, does that create more infill housing? Does that change the way we get allocated for certain funds and grants? If we got high VMT on housing bills, what does that mean? And staff can answer too. I'm just kind of curious to the implications, because here we are bantering about numbers without understanding what those numbers also have an implication for.
So maybe I can just take a stab, and this is where this gets less technical really and more kind of policy oriented a little bit, right? But ironically, if you were to set an unachievable threshold, right, where you had no projects come in the long term, that could have a negative impact to VMT in Cupertino, meaning that it could cause more VMT, because over time, the siting of housing in the right places in Cupertino will lead to a lower VMT, right? So part of what's informed our recommendation, staff recommendation, is really understanding that while we don't have a robust transit network yet in Cupertino, we hope that one day transit will be better in our part of the valley. That this target is achievable yet challenging enough for us as a community. That would still allow projects to occur, that would still allow the growth of what's envisioned by the community in the general plan. I hope that.
So if we chose option 4 and go super aggressive, that means we can build more projects?
No, the opposite.
That's what I want to make sure.
Yeah, the more aggressive options, 3 and 4, would require regional collaboration with cities around us to really have the VMT reduction. So you'd have to have multi-jurisdictional projects occurring.
Got it. So if we went with the option 1 or 2, that frees up with us with the ability to build more housing. That's what you're saying.
Correct. It makes it easier to build more.
Okay. How do we most conservatively reduce VMT, given your professional judgment here?
How do we most conservatively? I'm sorry, could you restate the question?
How do we most conservatively reduce VMT? Like, I mean, we're using the numbers and the analysis that we have to actually get to a VMT number that's achievable.
So in our professional opinion, the number that's been chosen, the 14.4%, is the most realistic way to reduce VMT. And that if we went with options 3 or 4, it would actually, given the realities for transit in our area, our sphere of influence, that it would start to negate the intention of reducing VMT. So we think that, and Teresa and Dan can feel free to chime in, as they're really the technical experts on VMT, but that is the rationale behind the staff recommendation.
And the interesting thing is, like, when we think about these numbers, right, we're operating on baseline numbers, but and they're based on 2015 models. How do we take into account, and I know this is going to be a question for policymakers everywhere over time, how do we take into account the COVID-19 implications, right, of work from home? And I know everyone in the commission has been asking some sort of question like this. How do we account for EV usage? How do we account for, maybe we put a Costco here, and so we don't have to go to Sunnyvale. Maybe we put those kind of like trade-offs that occur. I mean, we also have a developer that decided it'd be great to put 10,500 parking spaces. How do we account for those kind of things as we start thinking about regional housing policy, and more specifically our city's housing policy?
That's a really good point, and I think it's important to stress that this is not going to ever be done. The analysis and research into VMT, and especially into the mitigations, will be ongoing and evolving based on the factors that you brought up. There has been some thought put into how COVID impacts a return to normal. There's a few scenarios that Farron Pierce has thought through. But the reality is, in the end, no one really knows when and how return to normal would be, and what are the lasting impacts to employment in the Bay Area. But the short answer is that there will be continued analysis of that, and we will have to continue to do this on an ongoing basis.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. I want to go through some of the document and some of the considerations. I thought that was a worthwhile report that you have there, and I think we should understand the implications of the decisions made. I'm going to share, if possible, this PDF of the draft white paper. So let me pop it here so everyone can see it as well. So on page, I believe this is 24, if those are following from home and can't see and are on the phone, why was household generated VMT per resident taken out of the equation here? I think this is household generated VMT and the other metrics kept in, just to understand why.
we wanted to simplify the presentation is kind of the short story here. We do have the numbers crunched for those kind of rates per resident, like home-based VMT per resident, home-based work VMT per employee. However, to kind of look at the changes in total VMT over time, we did want to use that total VMT number to come up with the rough reduction percentages. So generally speaking, if you wanted to continue to use, say, home-based VMT per resident for residential projects, home-based work VMT per employee for employment projects, we would still recommend that 14.4% reduction to bring it roughly in line. But those are kind of easier to understand numbers for the lay public, to be sure.
Understood. I'm going to fly to the next set of recommendations. Have a question here as well. This is on page 36 for those following with the PDF at home. Okay, so you made some suggestions on screening for following project types. And can you just walk through when or how those are applicable for us in terms of like what is a small development? And then of course, and it also sounded like based on the comment about Redwood City being able to move from half a mile to quarter mile on transit stops, that's within our purview to actually make those kind of considerations. So taking the first one in place, what's a small development? And then of course-
So small developments under the CEQA definition are those with less than 110 vehicle trips per day.
Okay, so they're using the 110 VMT for a small development. Could a developer just break up a parcel into like 6 pieces and just count those separately and count each area and break up parcels in a way to actually skirt VMT?
That is a question I don't know the answer to.
I subdivide. I use the subdivision to actually then skirt around some of the rules to get to it. Let's say I put a retail complex strip and create it into 6 condo units as part of a master plan, but each 6 are separate. I'm just trying to think about how these exceptions could pop up. So,
Sheriff, you're talking about breaking up a project into sort of different pieces when it's really one comprehensive project. There's a whole raft of CEQA precedent on this issue, preventing what they call segmentation or piecemealing of projects. Sounds like that's what you're asking about.
Exactly. Thank you. So there's prevention in place for that. Okay. Thank you. So, all right. And then of course, regarding transit priority areas, for example, let's say we've got, I don't know, high priority route using buses. At the moment, there's probably, at most like 2 people on the bus or less per route. Maybe we'll get back to better numbers in the future. If service drops in between that piece, does that take away that high priority area for transit in terms of like transit-based housing for exemptions?
So per kind of typical CEQA practice, the analysis would be based on the existing conditions at the time of the notice of preparation of an EIR. So generally speaking, in the future, if your transit service changes and that change is in effect whenever a project begins the process, then the transit priority area should reflect that. However, I don't believe that would apply if, say, a project is already underway and approved and the transit service is eliminated.
Got it. Okay. So if we went from 20-minute service to 30-minute service, we're no longer a high priority area, that would have an implication as well.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. Because we were facing something similar to like that with VTA. So I just wanted to be clear about that. Okay. Going to the next set of recommendations here. This is baseline VMT thresholds. So the baseline VMT we have right now, do we have any say in terms of how we adjust that? Because I heard some great thoughts from both Commissioner Takahashi and Commissioner Fung about how to recalculate that number. Is there something we have to do to make it defensible, to get more accurate of what we have? I mean, of course, we want a higher number now and a lower number to show later. I mean, that's typically how these games work. The question is, what do we do to do this? So to make sure we have the right accurate number to start with.
So this would be essentially following the logic of the substantial evidence being to make sure that you're supporting the state's greenhouse gas reduction goals and adjusting that VMT reduction to reflect the EV penetration and general fuel efficiency of vehicles owned by Cupertino residents. Home. Yeah, and work from home.
I mean, we had a situation where we've got a large employer with thousands of employees where they won't even tell us where they work. right? So we can't even do that calculation unless you manage to get to those numbers, right? I mean, that's a problem too, right? You know,
I mean, in the long run, the model calibration process kind of adjusts for some of this by looking at the actual changes in volumes on the roadway system. So that's kind of the long run approach. Dan, do you have any kind of additional thoughts on how that might apply specifically to Cupertino?
Yeah, so you're looking in the black box at the recommendations, in the green box are the possible options. And what we've presented as a staff recommendation is equivalent to the third bullet. So the first bullet is also an option, which would be more specific to your local conditions, your general plan. And so that's where we could take into account the more specific conditions of Cupertino. Typically that's done as a part of a general plan or a climate action plan, could be a housing element, something that's done at a citywide scale. When communities are considering a more specific threshold, that's when they're collecting that specific data. So they take the opportunity to do that. And there are jurisdictions like Palo Alto and Los Gatos that I mentioned earlier that are doing that.
Well, it sounded they did number one, lead agency discretion. So, okay, thank you very much for that. And then going back, I think there's this one. Thresholds. Nope, I got that one. I think there's one more. So on this one, the cumulative transportation threshold. So do we use that? When do we invoke that? Do we use that at a point in terms of certain types of projects? Like when does it apply?
So any project that would usually require cumulative analysis under CEQA, so to reflect kind of the full array of changing conditions in the sphere of influence, would need to present not just its baseline VMT, which is the numbers that we've presented so far, but also its cumulative effect on VMT. So in combination with everything else that is expected to reasonably occur, how would that change or adjust the initial estimated VMT number for that project?
So not picking on Costco intentionally, but because it's in a different city. And if we put a Costco in, right, would that actually reduce our VMT because it would offset Sunnyvale, San Jose and some other Mountain View in terms of the traffic there, and then keep people within our area? Is that one of those things that could be used in an advantage for a project? Versus a large developer who's builds lots of office space and creates high VMT, but is not exempt and is not CEQA exempt, right? What do you do in that situation?
So for the Costco example, that would of course need a more detailed and specific analysis, but I can certainly see the argument being made that there is a finite amount of demand for Costco in the South Bay.
Tell from the toilet paper, but go ahead.
In the South Bay, and adding an additional Costco just absorbs some of that demand from the others. I can certainly see that argument being made. Again, additional analysis would be necessary to see how that would hold out under kind of a transportation planning perspective. And then can you repeat the second half of your question again, Commissioner?
The second question is but then we have this other case where sometimes we have projects that are CEQA exempt, right? Which leads to high office to housing ratios, right? Creating people bringing VMT in and using your calculations. We don't know how many employees they might be or if they're all work from home or not. And there's no way to actually do that metric. That would be considered something that break that threshold, right?
Yes, and because the threshold is CEQA specific, any project that is exempt from CEQA consideration would not necessarily have to perform that analysis. That's correct.
Okay, so we get some projects that are exempt from CEQA that can skirt the rules, and if they decide to put I don't know, thousands of parking spaces in place, and that doesn't affect our calculations at all, is what they're saying.
It's more that if they're exempt from CEQA, they would not be preparing the documentation that we're talking about here.
Okay. Would that be included in our calculations for VMT in the future?
To the extent that the project is included in the future year land use, it would affect the citywide calculations for VMT in the future.
So we could be disadvantaged by a situation where someone actually is exempt from CEQA, but adds to VMT, and then we'd have to make it up through all the other means, even though that project could be significantly bigger. Let's say that they add like, you know, like 1 million VMT to our number, but that's being calculated, right? And we have no way of reducing that million. If a new office project shows up, you know, that, or a new regional shopping mall, or, you know, whatever big, that, you know, like we build a stadium, right? You know, not that we have room for it, but you get the idea.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. And exemptions typically in CEQA are for relatively small projects. The list of examples you gave, I would consider to be pretty large projects and would need to do their own VMT analysis. And you know, VMT by its nature actually is something that it makes a lot more sense to think about at a citywide cumulative level as a whole. You know, it's really challenging to go individual project by individual project for a cumulative VMT analysis. So, you know, I think I'd say that when we describe exemptions, it's typically for a relatively small project that's really meant to be supportive of, you know, community services and that sort of thing.
Okay. My concern is because of the housing bills that are being passed, trying to exempt CEQA in some of these housing bills. That's all. And trying to make sure that we protect our communities when that does occur. So that's really it. I think that's it on my end for questions. I'll see if anyone else has any questions, and I'll stop sharing here. Bring that back to everybody else. Anybody else with additional questions? Okay, I'm going to jump to public comment, and then we'll take a break from the public comment and then come back. If that's okay with the commissioners. Anybody else have anything they want to add that they've missed? Last chance? Or we always
Actually,
do
I'll take that last chance if that's okay. I actually wanted to maybe illuminate a little bit more. Commissioner Wong asked about the let's see, about the result of the VMT, the change in, you know, the change to a VMT standard. So I'm curious, maybe I'll ask the question a little bit differently than he asked. Looking forward, how do you anticipate projects that are coming for approval? How do you anticipate they would look when the standard is a VMT standard as opposed to an LOS standard? I'm just curious. You know, of course, there are cities that have mileage on this already. I'm just curious what your thinking is.
I think specific to Cupertino, again, a fairly high VMT area within the Bay Area. So I think that you will likely see more significant unavoidable impacts. Additionally, because the proposed thresholds are on a per capita basis, project size has less of an effect on the total amount of impacts. So because it's per capita, even if it's a small project that has a high VMT rate that might not have added enough traffic to cause an LOS impact, it may still have a significant and unavoidable impact based on VMT. So that's going to be the primary difference that you're going to be seeing. In addition, I know that Chris has mentioned that the recommended threshold with the 14.4% reduction, that is kind of seen as aggressive but feasible for mitigation using transportation demand management strategies. The rule of thumb for suburban areas is that you can achieve maybe up to a 15% reduction in VMT through those TDM strategies.
Okay, maybe related to that. So when you have so I've sat in presentations from San Jose when they're having the discussion around the VMT conversion, and they actually frame it in a different way. You know, and I think that is the flavor there is that there are, you know, there's a streamlining effect for you know, transit zones and things like that. And I'm just curious, do you expect that to be a factor, or is the scale, of course, the scale of what they're talking about in San Jose is very different than what's happening here?
Streamlining will likely be in effect for any of those items that would receive some sort of screening or exemption. So that would be small local serving retail, and that would be projects that are in the transit proximity area that the city decides to adopt.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
I would like to add to that, right? So we've got a large SB 35 project that completely circumvents SECA and adds millions of VMT. Is that factored in? Just so we know, because we have a baseline here.
I am not certain if that project is included in the 2040 land use in the VTA model, is the short answer.
It is not, I can tell you that for sure.
That being said, it would presumably be included in future year projections. So usually these models work on a 5 to 10 year cycle where we get a new projection for 2040, 2050, and so on and so forth, and would likely be added in when the modeling staff at VTA next review their land use tables. And at that point, it would be included in any of your VTA projections. It does add a fair amount of density from a model standpoint. And so from a model standpoint, you may see that it actually has a slight reduction on your VMT per capita. But that's
with
a generalization.
10,500 parking spaces, but with 10,500 parking spaces and mostly office, right?
So
those factors have to be counted. So.
When we do look at the VMT per service population, office does have a slightly VMT increasing effect on that metric. And that's just because offices generate more VMT per person. And they also tend to, any employment-based use also tends to attract at least some number of visitors who aren't in that denominator. So I will say that that could very well increase the total VMT per service population, even if, say, your home-based VMT per resident might decrease.
So 1.8 million square feet of office might have some effect, is what you're saying.
It will definitely have an effect on your total VMT. And without running the model, I don't want to hypothesize too much on the effect on the VMT rates.
I'm just smiling only because we probably need to factor that so we can get a good baseline before we can make a decision. I mean, I think we might want to have to recalculate some of these assumptions because, we've got a project coming. It's huge. It's impacting our VMT. If your goal is to reduce GHG and reduce the VMT numbers, we've got some significant challenges because of these CEQA exemptions and SB 35 streamlining, right? If we don't care about it and say, okay, let's kick the can down the road to 3 years out, then yeah, okay, fine. We'll choose one of these options. But it might help us to understand what the impact is for a project that size that has been I don't think it's ministerially approved yet, but that is in the works of actually coming, and it's imminent in some form or another. So we might want to make some of those assumptions, is at least my thought process here. With that, I don't know if anyone has more questions, but I don't want to hold anyone from a bio break, and I don't want to hold the general public up. Let's do general public questions. Take a bio break from there.
I want to, just as the counterpoint to that,
please, Commissioner Fung.
Yeah, I would actually comment here that the density is a factor in reduction of VMT. The other thing, and please feel free to comment on this as well. The presence of office does give the opportunity for a TDM to be put in place. Which actually the message there is, when you had those were part of the discretionary, those were included as part of the discretionary approval when the decision was made to forego the discretionary approval. That the impact that's when you see the impact because there is no requirement for a TDM now.
No, there's no requirement now. I agree with you. So, but
that doesn't mean there won't be a TDM. Just for practical purposes.
We may have no choice but to have a TDM.
So. Well, no. I mean, people have to get to the office for the office to be useful. So, I think that there are different ways to look at it. The alternative, at developing a lower density, particularly at that site, would have potentially had much the kind of gross level of the total VMT effect is smaller with less development there, but per capita VMT maybe could very well be higher. You could build a situation, you could build a mall that has no opportunity for TDM and then get much more traffic impact. Anyway, just as a counterpoint.
I always appreciate your counterpoints, Commissioner Fung. Let's go to the general public and let's move. I've got two questions, two people with their hands raised. We've got Jennifer and Peggy Griffin. So let's start with Jennifer and go to Peggy.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, Jennifer, you're unmuted.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, thank you to the staff for trying to explain this new lingo. You know, I speak LOS very well. I've been to multiple meetings for the last 15 to 20 years where LOS was used. I've gone to other cities and other counties where LOS, it's a common term that is used and understood by the public. I will tell you right now, my level of resentment to having another lingo thrust at the public so that we are going to be dumb and in the dark again is very, very high. You know, it's not anyone's fault, but it's making me distrust Jerry Brown and our current governor, because Jerry signed this law in 2013. At the time, I believe this was a setup for the big Scott Wiener housing bills that are coming down the line. I think this is why the redevelopment agencies were taken down in 2013. The handwriting is on the wall. I can tell you right now, having gone through the Apple II campus in the last 10 years, 5 years, I am really glad we had LOS because I understood it all the way. I sit on the edge, my house is on the edge of West San Jose with their urban villages. God knows what they're doing with this new lingo. But then again, you know, we move on. We have to understand this. But I read an article today that was from a group called To Preserve LA, which was from March of 2019. They are extremely concerned about SB 730. Sorry, I'm losing it here. 734. They are very, very critical because it appears to be a giveaway to developers so that they don't have to provide adequate parking. They called it I think it was a sheep and wolf clothing bill. It removes CEQA protections that are already there that require that developers have to provide parking. I live in that one quarter mile zone from transit that Scott Wiener seems to keep harping on. And I really resented the fact that my neighborhood was a half mile in, and the transit right now in Cupertino sucks. Okay, I'm sorry. COVID has changed a lot of stuff. I don't trust the people in Sacramento that are telling us we have to start using this stuff. I'm asking questions. Why do we have to do this? Keep LOS and don't do anything to change the balance until the public understands what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Let's move to Peggy.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hello?
Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us.
Okay. Commissioners, staff, thank you for letting me speak. I sent a speaking sheet. I don't know if they've got it or not that they could put up. Hello?
Let's see if we can put that up if someone has that on staff.
Yeah, I'm pulling it now. Oh, there we go. Can you see it now?
Oh, yeah, and let's reset the clock as well. So.
Oh, okay. And now this is just a talking point for right now. The VMT screening, I feel like you shouldn't exempt anything from consideration, that you can always give it a waiver or allow it to pass for some reason, but I think that all projects should be looked at with regard to transportation analysis. The VMT threshold, you discussed some of the options. Let me go back. I've got some notes here. I would like the staff to explain what the consequences are if you go from half a mile versus a quarter mile. And the retail currently, I think you said the state was at 50,000 square feet. What about mixed use? Can some project do a 50,000 square foot retail and then do this humongous apartment or office building and get exempt? So I'm hesitant about setting a 50,000 square foot limit and then letting the project go. Let's see. You said the report said you could pick total project generated VMT or do service per service population or per capita, but the discussion seems to always say per capita. I'd like to discuss whether you have that option. The metrics, let's see. For smaller projects, it sounded like an accounting method would be a better way to go, but what is defined as a small project? I think there was a mention of 110 VMTs, but that ought to be talked about. Let's see. Oh, LOS. Someone who was presenting said that the GP, the general plan LOS levels would have to change based on what you decide on the VMT. But a lot of people want the LOS numbers to remain the same. So if you want to have the LOS numbers remain the same that they are in the GP, what VMT thresholds do you have to set? Also keep LOS as part of the general plan as an analysis requirement. Let's see, that way you've got impact fees during the project review, but maybe review the impact fees to make sure that they cover the cost of what needs to be mitigated. That's about all. Sorry, thank you.
That's it. That's a lot. I think if can we have staff answer some of those questions for clarifications, if that's okay?
Sure. Could you bring the document back up though? There's a lot to.
Yeah, Peggy, can you put that back up, or if Beth, if you had that up, that would be great.
Sure. Hold on.
So the first question I think that came up was regarding the option 3. Why not select option 3, the no VMT growth option? And I think that we tried to answer that earlier in the meeting, that we don't think that option would be achievable and would ironically or paradoxically lead to a higher VMT. That's why that option was not chosen, because it doesn't mean that the VMT actually wouldn't grow over time. And what would happen over time is that the VMT would grow because projects couldn't be approved, which would lead to a higher VMT for the community. There is the option of doing a quarter-mile corridor versus a half a mile. There's also the option of not exempting or screening the categories that are being listed. That's important to note. We're not. That's a decision that can be made this evening. The retail, the question about whether or not retail could be included as part of a mixed-use project, it could not, because that would be considered one project. If you had a small 50,000 square foot CVS or Walgreens, not to throw out corporate names, I probably should do that, and then a giant mixed-use project above it, that would not qualify. And then in terms of choosing the different metrics, we do have the option of keeping all of the metrics available at our discretion. And we think that makes the most sense because different types of projects will have different outputs. And it makes sense to give the city as many tools as possible in reviewing and looking at projects so that when you really analyze them, you can see how each tool puts out a different metric. If you just choose one now and say that's the only metric we're going to use, then that's the only metric you have in your toolbox. And then in the last point is really important to note, the point that you made about what VMT would be required to keep the city's LOS. And unfortunately, there's no answer for that. Because VMT and LOS are totally different. Ironically, you can have a very congested area with bad traffic, to speak like layman terms, right? That has very low VMT. And think of busy downtown areas, regardless of the size of the community, whether it's, Pasadena, California, or New York City, or Cupertino. So because of that, you really can't choose a VMT threshold based on our LOS. The best we can do and what we've attempted to do is choose a balanced threshold that won't cause a huge change to the system and to what the community's expressed that it desires in terms of LOS. So we've attempted to do that. So I hope that answers some of your questions.
Thank you, staff, for that. And thank you, Peggy. Just a follow-up question to Chris here. So it sounds like the assumptions behind VMT to reduce GHG never took into account EV adoption and EV mandates or work from home. Is that a fair statement?
I believe that there's always been for EV adoption a calculation made that assumes a statewide EV adoption, and that will continue to change as the EV adoption continues to change. The stay-at-home piece is probably, because of COVID, much more variable, but that will continue to be analyzed.
Okay. Well, thank you for pontificating there. I think we've exhausted our public comments. Thank you, everyone, for your public comments. Let's take a break and re-adjourn to 9:10. Give people an opportunity to take a bio break, come back, and then we will deliberate, I guess. So thanks a lot, everyone. We're going to go to break and see you at 9:10. here. So give people a couple seconds to come back. Okay, if staff can actually put up the choices we have to make, I think, on the screen, I think that would help with our deliberation, as well as any kind of comments. Let's do that, and then welcome back, everybody.
Sorry, Commissioner, did you ask for the slide with the choices?
Yeah, slide with the choices so that
yes,
the decisions that are to be made.
Okay, well, Teresa, could you bring up that slide on the presentation when you're back?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. I appreciate that. One moment, Commissioner or Vice Chair.
Yeah, and just an agenda item note, I think we have some time limitations on some of our commissioners today. So item number 3 will probably be moved for those that are actually waiting for item number 3. So. Okay, anybody want to start?
Well, I guess I'll go then. It's pretty quiet.
I wasn't sure if my Zoom was out.
Yeah, really. Yeah. Everyone's holding really still. So first of all, I'd like to thank the staff and the consultants here on a very good presentation. I think that when we had the first study session, without having the kind of detailed compilation that we saw in the white paper, it was difficult to really tell, where we were going and what did this mean. But I actually, I read a pretty large chunk of the white paper and generally found, I found things to be very well thought out, very well justified, and I actually liked all of the suggestions in the black boxes. Normally, I'd have something that I'd be picking on here or there, but I felt very good about the material that was presented. I think it made sense. I think that I'm actually a big believer in the VMT transition. It's going to be controversial. There's no question, but I think that really does, in terms of, a lot of the planning design in California is driven by GHG reduction. I think this has a better chance of making that happen. That's not to say that there aren't weaknesses. I think, and I mentioned this a little bit prior. I went to a presentation, the city of San Jose did a presentation, extensive presentations. That's a number of years ago now, and felt that the only part that was difficult to understand in the VMT strategy is that, generally speaking, I think the belief is that the streamlining effect of identifying areas where VMT, where there's VMT exemptions, would help them in kind of densifying along some of the corridors that existed today. And, there are financial challenges to making that happen, but this created, I think their belief was that this would create an incentive that would make it possible for, building a little bit taller, building a little bit denser, and doing that, the long-term goal in San Jose has always been, in recent years has actually been to focus on the corridors because there's an opportunity to deliver transit there, transit and infrastructure, and not have it be as spread out. San Jose is probably spread out a city as possible. So I think that that part is a little bit weird because what that does is it tends to ask you to densify along a pattern of development that was constructed under a completely different set of guidelines. If you identified a great location and the intention to bring transit there, I think that kind of model, the VMT model, does make it a little harder to do. It really says, focus on where, if transit is the one of the main factors for streamlining. It says focus on the places where you've chosen to pay, to place transit in the past. So I think that's the only weakness that I see. But in general, in particular, I think that that's a little bit where my questions were going. Do we expect radical change? Well, I think the other changes, there'll be a significant change as an effect of this policy, but that it's not, it's not going to be, Manhattan. I'm sure there'll be people who disagree with me on that. So in general, I think that I also agree. I agree with the recommendation for option 2. I think that you'll have a hard time justifying anything that isn't getting into the ballpark, or at least in the striking range of 15%. Whether you can realize that or not is a whole nother challenge. But that I think that the staff has wisely spoken here that picking a more aggressive objective will probably make it very difficult because of the nature of the mitigations that are required in a VMT model. Make it very difficult for development or redevelopment to happen. So I actually support that model as well. Actually, there was some talk about the screening factors. I think that the screening factors were very reasonable. The only caveat I would place on that would be, if you're giving out exemptions for certain classes of development, which are, certain sizes of stores or the kind of smaller, I don't know. I don't know that I would say a 20 unit apartment is really small, but that on that size of development, that perhaps you might want to consider whether there needs to be a cap on the number of projects that are approved under exemptions like that. So I would give that some consideration, but the reality is, it's probably going to be hard for that to, the number of 100% affordable projects or small stores like that. The reality is that they probably are not. They're not going to be enormous numbers of those. Anyway, so I think that those are the main points. I might have had one other item. Let's see. No, I think that's it. So in general, I'm supportive of option 2. I think that's a good way to go. And I guess actually the other point I did have to say was that, I actually think it's a good idea for the general plan to continue to include an LOS calculation. I hope that we don't get into legal trouble by trying to drive mitigations based on that, though. I think that, under the law, mitigations require, kind of a nexus to demonstrate that the mitigations you're asking for are proportional to the impact. And it's very clear that OPR was wanting to disassemble the old model here, which was generally, large projects must build a lot of road. So I hope that we, that we follow the spirit of where this is trying to go. It's important to look at that, what that impact would be. But, if the alternative to building, to widen an intersection is to do things that enhance traffic or, cause there to be greater connectivity of the homes you build locally with the offices you build, that those will actually be better solutions for the city overall in time. That's it for me. Thanks.
Cool. Commissioner Takahashi, anything you want to add?
Sure, I'll go next. Thanks, Commissioner Fung. I guess I'm pretty aligned, I think, with your thinking in terms of supporting the second option, based on there is a significant reduction in terms of the 14.4% change. I think the growth numbers are probably maybe overstated in terms of our population growth, but that's the current thinking in terms of that trend. Also, the VMT hybrid model with the LOS, I think, is something that does make sense for the general public, so that there's an understanding of what's going on, because from what you feel in terms of traffic, you feel LOS, you feel the lights being busier, you feel backups and delays. You don't feel a person that's driving 50 miles from Gilroy, for example, to work in Cupertino, right? That's not necessarily felt. And so I think it's a good mix of trying to balance what the community would feel versus driving to reduce greenhouse gases. And I think it probably makes the city staff work a little harder from the standpoint of looking at projects two ways, but and it'll depend on the location of a project and the size of a project, right? Given the remaining undeveloped land, how many projects are really going to trip the 110? Not a lot, probably. So, while it's good to plan and understand, I think for our specific community, it's all infill development. So there's not a lot of big projects left for the city to consider. But with regard to the elements, the specific elements, the half mile, the size of retail, there's so many variables that I really think it's silly to think that we can effectively say, well, if there's a cul-de-sac and it's pointed in the wrong direction and the person actually has to walk this way, that shouldn't be included, right? So I'm glad there's not an overzealous thinking on that regard, which there might have been in the past, because it's just it's I don't know, it's something that we don't need to overthink. I understand why people want to look at adjusting those things, because you can kind of see that there's a general impact, but we just I don't think know enough to really feel like, okay, there's strong rationale to make this recommendation. So leaving those where they are, I don't have any issue with that. Going to the variables, just what the future looks like 10 years from now. I mean, I just go back 1 year, and if people would have said that we were at where we're at today, nobody would have believed that. And does the future look drastically different than we predict with autonomous vehicles, for example? Possibly, probably. So while we're doing our best to predict what the future looks like, it's all going to change, which kind of leads me to a question, which is, once we establish this criteria in a changing world, how often do we come back to these elements and revise to reflect current reality? Is that something that's readily done, or is that a act of God?
I believe we'll be reporting back on an annual basis and finding on an annual basis. That's what San Jose is doing. But correct me if I'm misstating that, Teresa or Dan. I think that's
okay. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Okay, off to Commissioner Saxena.
Sorry, I was muted. So actually, I have more questions about this big project thing. Like Commissioner Takahashi just mentioned that we may not have many big projects, but we already have an SB 35 approval standing, and it's huge. Okay, so I wanted to get a sense of how that all fits in. And if I remember, Chair Wong, I think you mentioned it's not included so far. Is that true? And
I was asking if it was included, but I think staff said it was not in the calculations. Is that correct? Let's validate that.
I don't believe so, but I can't say with certainty.
Okay, thanks. So I think because that's perhaps the biggest thing which is getting built in Cupertino, we probably should have some more information about that before we make a call. I think that's the way I would frame it, because that dwarfs everything in terms of the traffic impact, and probably that will have the largest traffic impact over the next decade or two in Cupertino. And without incorporating that, I think our decisions may not be well informed. So I would encourage this for us to look into that first before we approve any guidelines. Thanks. That's all from me.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Commissioner Saxena. Okay, I guess I'll add some thoughts here. I mean, first of all, you know, I think staff did a really good job with here and the consultants in terms of level of detail. Sometimes we make fun of the fact that there's 177 pages, but, you know, it is very useful and very helpful to have that supporting detail. I did spend a lot of time looking at this and talking to some folks about how they've been working within these constraints of VMT and LOS to meet the state legislation requirements. I'm inclined to go with the staff recommendation to keep VMT close to what we have. I think that's important. I actually think we're going to make it up given some of the improvements that we have given from work from home and what we have with electric vehicles. And I also agree with Commissioner Takahashi here about the need not to get to cul-de-sacs and details and he's right about those are minimal. But that last point that Commissioner Saxena said about the impact on Valco, I think it's kind of important, right? These SB 35 ministerial projects that circumvent CEQA. I would say, yeah, if it was like, a 10-unit apartment building, yeah, who cares, right? We're talking about millions and millions of square feet of office space and thousands of parking spaces and, and homes and units being built, 1,200 units plus, and depending whatever plan that's being crafted up at this moment. And that data is really important. It's not a small number. It's not like a, one-off project. It's a huge number here. Right. And then add that to the fact that, we have a large employer that can't tell us where their employees are and where they live. We can't even calculate VMT from that. So, but I think at least we should come back with some calculations for an estimate, based on, some of the proposals for the SB 35 project for Valco and see what that impact is so that we can actually then choose a metric. Because I feel very uncomfortable that we don't have some kind of baseline that's reasonable given the fact that this project is imminent, right? And that to me is overly concerning. As for the screenings that are there, I think, I like some of the things about moving things to a quarter mile. I'd love to know more of the other options that we have to choose from there and understand what what the implications are from staff, right? To move things from a quarter mile from major transit lines, getting down to the point where we can actually, put conditional time limits on some of these proposals so that we actually have some control, given the fact that local control is being taken away from us on a massive basis. So I think that will help. And then that will help us then understand like what we can do to put more housing, adjust what we do with office, think about how we can trade VMT in the future by, maybe putting like things that are available in other cities that are high, frequented items, right? Maybe we won't get a mall since malls are dead, but maybe a Costco would mitigate our VMT. Maybe certain types of things, certain types of tax generating properties would help us as well. And we want to be able to save for that and be able to, prioritize those projects, prioritize affordable housing at the same time, right? Right now we're in the dark without that number. And so I'm kind of in a position where I wish we had more data. So I don't know what other commissioners think.
Can I make one quick comment on that, Vice Chair? I just want to point out that the collection of the data that goes into our baseline is a rather enormous effort. It's a fixed point in time, that data set, right? It's not an ongoing thing. So if we start to look at proposed projects moving forward, it opens up sort of this kind of whole new effort. So it's just something to keep in the back of your heads. That while it's possible, it almost like running a. I
mean, it would be a simple kind of question to say. Nothing simple, I know that, and I don't want to minimize the amount of work you guys did. So I appreciate your comment there. It's a simple question of framing, and it's a hard, complex calculation on the back end of saying, hey, what happens when you add 1.8 million square feet of office space? And what would be the impact of 10,500 parking spots and 1,200 new homes in an area that's CEQA exempt to VMT? Like, that would be the parameters, right? And you have enough models to say, yeah, 1.8 million, that's how many offices, that's how many employees. Here's the percentage we apply to all the other office buildings, right? Here's the VMT for these types of homes, right? And 1,200 units of homes means X number of miles traveled. You have those, right, as baselines to give at least some indication so that we can say, here's the calculation, here's a rough scenario if we were to include Valco into here. And because of that, maybe instead of option 1 or option 2, we might want to think about option 4, right? I mean, if it was like a small project, like, what's happening over at the Oaks in Westport, it's okay, fine. It's not really going to hit us that much. But we're talking millions and millions of square feet, thousands and thousands of parking spots.
I'll just comment, if you don't mind, I'll just comment at this point that
please.
The general plan passed in 2014 did include about 2 million square feet of office to be built in Cupertino over those years. So that part isn't a shock. It fits within the envelope of things that were evaluated in the prior GP CEQA.
Yeah.
Back to the staff, though. Is that included in the calculations then?
Does it matter?
It should. Because it would impact VMT.
Well, but we're setting a.
If we had the baseline built in, then it's fine, right?
Right, but set a baseline. So there's a project that's in theory approved. Whether or not it gets built or not, right, is another big question, given the change in the business climate for office demand. I think is not going to be what it was when the project was moved forward. So the dynamics of that I think are ones where I don't know if anybody really knows what's going to happen there. So I question whether it matters at all from the standpoint of that baseline number. And if the project goes through, then we assess, well, again, so the 2 scenarios it's in, which means the baseline is the baseline. Second scenario is it's not in, which means there's a big development. My assumption was it's kind of in and there's nothing big left to do, but let's say it's not in. So that goes in and it consumes a lot of VMT, right? Because, there's you guys are gonna have fun with that one, right? From the standpoint of you got a lot of housing, and you got a lot of jobs, and what percentage of the jobs have the housing that people are actually living close, right? And then you've got some retail. Well, maybe that's also good because it's mixed use, and the people that live there, right, they're going to use that retail, assuming there's maybe a grocery store there or something. So I don't think it matters. So, but that's just my thought at this point in time, and when it does happen, net it out and then readjust in the annual revision of the plan. So again,
I think it makes a big difference, Commissioner Takahashi, only because those numbers are huge, right? And so maybe the project doesn't get built as planned, and the city and the developer hypothetically decides to negotiate an agreement.
Right, but we won't know until it gets built, right? And what gets built, I think there's still probably, I would think there might be some backpedaling on that office space. I mean, if you're going to build that much office and it's going to be vacant, that's not the same business case as it was going up into that project where office space was everything. And now I question the value of office space given vacancies that and the work from home, that I don't think anybody doubts that there's going to be more work from home moving forward than there was prior, just given businesses seem to be adapting and productivity has not degraded significantly. And so I think the element of companies allowing more work from home is going to reduce the demand for office space. So,
Commissioner Takahashi, I'd argue the counterpoint. Let's say they didn't build the office and decide to build more housing there. Right. That would also impact our calculations. But I think it's important to know what our maximum.
Also, right.
Yeah. What was the impact for planning? Right. We're planners, or in the planning commission, right? And our job is to at least forecast. We have a given that may happen, as planned and as proceeded, right, at 1.8 million square foot of, of office space. If that gets built, we should plan for that, and we should include that in how we think about our VMT. If that doesn't get built, that's amazing, right? We go build housing, and we go figure out what we have to do as well, and what the VMT impact is.
We've looked at that stupid project for years and looked at so many different scenarios of different amounts of office, different amounts of housing, and we kind of thought that there was a compromise that would work. And did not seem to, right, things change, councils change, and their view of a specific solution changes, and it changes the direction of everything, and here we are. Right, so I don't know. That's just my opinion, so.
Vice Chair, I can say that we can certainly look into the assumptions that were made for Valco, and we can report back perhaps. The intent tonight was to get a motion or recommendation to return with an ordinance so that we can then go to council, because this should have been implemented July 1st of this year.
No, I understand that.
And so we're, possibly, maybe an option would be for us to report back before the time, or when we return with an ordinance at a future meeting.
I understand your point there. And yes, we should have had one by July 1st. I think that was the requirement. So, okay.
So actually, if you don't mind, I do think as part of balancing that discussion, I really do, the current general plan projected growth in office. It really was about 2 million square feet of office over the plan period. It included, 1,400 homes at that time, with the consideration for more than that, and as part of the ERA, as part of the CEQA analysis, so, or the EIR. So, I would just say, this is not a matter of there was going to be nothing there. This is a matter of there was going to be, there was a plan for what was going to happen in Cupertino. This consumes a lot of that plan. There's no question of that. So that should just be taken into account as part of that analysis. I don't have a problem with an analysis, although I do think that, like all the planning tools, these are not based on specifically built this building here and you put this house here. They are, as part of a region, we expect this to happen. That expectation is not really radically different. I think what the kinds of things that were brought forward for Valco were not radically different than the kind of expectations for the sorts of things that were going to happen in Cupertino over the next 20 years.
Well, thanks for sharing your views, Commissioner Fung. Anybody else with any additional things? If there are no other questions, I have a procedural question for our city attorney. So, hi, Seth. How are you doing?
Very well. Thank you, Vice Chair. What's up?
So the recommended action at this moment is to make a motion to approve a baseline, correct?
I think that was one of three recommended actions.
One of three?
If I recall.
Okay.
Yeah.
What happens in the event is there a requirement for a certain number of votes? Is there a requirement for a majority of votes if we can't get a resolution up and running at the moment? Just hypothetically.
Your tie motion would be noted in the record. And I think we have no choice at this point but to proceed to council with that result, given that we don't have anyone else on the commission at the moment to break the tie. You're just talking about one of the three items, I assume.
Yeah, one of the three items here.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
if we get to that scenario.
Yeah.
So a tie pushes it over. Oh, go ahead.
Vice Chair Wong, and maybe for our assistant city attorney as well. A recommendation is technically not required for this item before it goes to City Council. I think the Public Works staff is asking for feedback that the staff can take to finalize their materials to the City Council. Is that correct, Chris?
Partly the study session on the
It is mostly correct. What we're asking for is feedback because this is a study session. There's no real action this evening. We will then return with an ordinance to amend the Cupertino municipal code, and that will come to the Planning Commission as an action. Then we have to go to council. That's why we have a little bit of a rush. We have to schedule another Planning Commission meeting and then another council meeting and then a second reading before we can actually implement this.
Understood. Yeah, I just
and
want to
you may have
understand the
someone
procedural
seated.
timeline.
Yeah. It might help before you, I don't know if we're at the point yet of looking at your options, but if staff could eventually put the three items back up on the screen.
That would be great. Let's do that.
Teresa, if you're still with us, could you put that slide back up? Thank you.
So we've seen this one for a while. And so this is choosing a % reduction target. What's the second one?
Yeah, so I think you want me to go back up to.
Cool. And do we have the options just like the way the reduction threshold was set up? Or those were all bundled into the recommendations, actually?
Correct. So the table that we were looking at is the first bullet. So that is the VMT reduction threshold for land use projects and plans. The VMT impact threshold for transportation projects, we're recommending a flat no net new VMT. Or staff is rather. So that basically indicates that you would have a significant impact if you added a transportation project that added a lot of additional capacity. Those projects, just due to kind of constrained right of way, are going to be very rare, so will not come up as often as land use projects. And then the final one is with respect to the different screening bullets, and I can scroll through the slideshow as needed once you guys get to discussion on that one.
Actually, if I may, if I can ask one question about the first item, does that, because I think this would help the commissioners, does that recommendation on a threshold, does it include the numerical baseline, or is that kind of a separate issue? Are they just discussing the percentage reduction?
So the percentage reduction would be, I think that the guidance that staff is looking for is kind of the extent to which the general method for getting to those 4 different levels was reached, and if there are small changes to the outputs based on any additional staff analysis needed, then the numbers would change accordingly, probably a very small amount. But that overall, it's direction on which of those kind of 4 tiers to look at. Chris, does that sound correct?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So how do we capture these recommendations procedurally? Just asking our city attorney. Is it a vote? There's nothing to vote. It's just, is there something that goes on? Are we voting on a recommendation to council, or?
So I agree with Chris that there's no formal, this is not a hearing, there's no formal action item here, but you are being asked to make a recommendation. I guess I defer to staff as to how they want this to be done, and how they'd like to see the information presented to council.
I think given that this is a study, each commissioner can kind of summarize in their comments, and have so far positions on the reduction thresholds, on the specific points, then we can use that to come back with an ordinance. I think it's going to be. I don't think we need a line vote.
I think from a record keeping perspective, it might be useful to capture each of the commissioners' comments so that council can actually see them. I think that will be useful given the different viewpoints we're going to have. And so maybe that's the way to do this. If we can just go down the line then, and with each one of these, let's start with the VMT reduction. Let's go to the slide with the options, and then we'll go to the impact threshold for transportation projects, and then we'll go through the screening guidance and take suggestions there and capture those. And I hope these are captured in the minutes so that that council can get a full understanding of what we've made, what suggestions we've made. Okay, I'll start with you, Commissioner Fung. I think you're pretty well versed.
Oh, okay, sure. With regard to this item, I support option 2 and the 14.4% recommended reduction. I think that, if I was going to provide justification for that, I think this is effectively in line with the state's stated goal of around 15%. I don't have an issue with the VMT calculation, but I recognize that that's a difference among the members here. I don't have a problem with this particular calculation as an illustration.
Okay, Commissioner Takahashi.
Same.
Okay, that makes it easy. We'll do you guys together. Commissioner Saxena.
I am a bit reluctant to make recommendation right now. I mean, I think for me, the Valco thing is for the biggest thing to understand what's happening, and without clarity of that, any guess is as good as anything else. Because that's going to be the biggest thing.
Yeah, I would agree with Commissioner Saxena here. I'd like to note in the record that without the Apple calculations and without the Valco projections, I use the word importantly projections since we don't know, but based on what was approved in SB 35, it's very hard for me to think about what our total city generated VMT may be. And then more importantly, depending on the density there, what the city generated VMT per person is. And I think we have a very great analysis here. And if we add those two inputs, I think we'll have something amazing to work with that we can always come back to and refer to as a master document to understand the impact. Those are the two biggest projects we're going to have for the next 10 years anyways. One was already built and the other one is, in the middle of, whatever they design. And so I think that impact is significant and might impact VMT numbers by as much as 15 to 20% here. So I think there's significance here. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and I would like to add one thing. Commissioner Takahashi had mentioned that, it's not even clear what's going to get built at Valco. I think from the point of view of orienting us, let's just assume two scenarios. One is the SB 35 scenario and what could be the tier 2 or one of the older one, the measure D scenario, and just get those numbers. So we have at least a ballpark sense of where we are, because it is the biggest thing the city will see. So let's not ignore that. I know we are sort of stuck in the middle. We aren't sure where it will go, but at least the impact should be thinking of that.
So I guess that's where we are on that. Let's go to the second one.
Actually, if I could just ask, so what would you hope to find with that analysis?
You're asking me or
I think
Commissioner?
So. Yeah,
I want to know. I mean, I want to know. Let's say our goal was to reduce overall VMT, and we've got such a high number to start with because of Valco, right? Or maybe Valco decides to change and it actually helps us with VMT. That might change our posture on citywide negotiations. That might change our posture on what gets built, or let's say they decide not to build Valco the way it is, and they put a Costco, and that's why I keep asking, not to use brand names, but Costco is a target here because we all head out there, right? We already have a Target. We don't have a Costco, right? Well, let's just say you put a Walmart here, right? A Walmart superstore or a Costco or a large big box, which we're already giving tax revenue to other cities. That would have a huge impact on VMT for us, or change VMT for us, not having the office space and having a Costco, right? So it's those kind of things I feel like we're missing. So
isn't this this is a 20-year projection on growth of the city, right? In terms of population. What was the end population in 2040 assumed to drive these numbers? 90?
Around 115,000 combined employees and residents.
Yeah. Right. So this is way out there. It's a projection that, right? It seems like you build Valco, there's a big chunk there, but again, there's just not, the rest is infill. It's just a 20-year projection of a linear growth rate, and we're overthinking it. But That's just
But a linear growth rate with 60,000 population. Today, we're estimated at 60,000 for.
Almost doubling, right?
No one can afford a home. How are you going to double this puppy?
Well, that's what this is assuming. This is assuming a population of 100. I heard what was the number? I should write it down.
115,000 with employees.
That includes employees, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
So today,
what's
that
the
number. Today there are 60,000 or 65,000 people here,
right.
And the baseline number in that calculation is over 80,000. So it's 87,000 or something. So there's already an assumption of about 15 or 20,000 employees. That's in line with the plans that have had in the past, where, when they were looking at employee head tax, they were talking about the outward numbers were something like 24,000, right?
So I think we got this one, right? 2 for yes on item 2, 2 for we need more data. We want the data updated based on Valco and or something else, right? So can we move on?
Based on Apple as well, where Apple's employees are.
Sure.
That's where. Let's go to the next one. I think that's what Commissioner Takahashi is suggesting.
Okay. We did not have a specific slide for the transportation project impacts because there was only the single kind of feasible recommendation, which was no net new VMT. That is also the standard that Caltrans is expected to adopt for projects that affect their roadways.
So there's no.
So what do we discuss?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Really nothing to discuss.
You could ask for a higher or lower number, but none of those
options are available.
Right.
No. I mean, would you build a traffic project that reduces the number of the amount of miles traveled? It's like pretty unlikely. That does. I mean, that could be things like you place investment into mass transit, but you don't do that on a city level. So,
yeah,
I guess just by basis of the fact that this is one that, the reason it doesn't have a slide is that this was identified in the category of things which would be regional, like not even county projects, but, Bay Area projects. So I think that I'm fine with that. No net gain. I guess I would, in the context that you could spend your money in such a way that it would cause, in support of, of better mass transit. The aggressive way to approach this would be, to have a slight reduction, to specify a reduction by a couple percent. But I think that if we're talking about things that we're doing within the city, then no net gain is probably about where it's at.
Yeah, given we don't have any control over those types of projects, really.
Actually, we might have some control. I might take a counterpoint here. Right. Let's say, and I'll be honest, right. I've seen VTA at its peak when we're supposed to peak ridership. If we counted the actual riders that were on our lines, right, and we just gave them vouchers for Uber, we might actually come out cheaper and actually increase VMT. Right. I mean, we wouldn't have to pay for the drivers. We wouldn't have to pay for the pensions on the drivers. We wouldn't have to pay for like these empty buses running around. Right. And we'd actually be able to give people point-to-point service. So your bus stop ends over here at the border of Cupertino, and we will take you by Uber everywhere else from there. And we would increase VMT, actually deliver higher quality service and drive down cost. So that's an example of one of those. Sounds like a radical idea, but I'm just telling you, I mean, we'd save so much money, and we wouldn't be stuck in this mass transit corridor by accident that's throwing all these housing bills at us. I mean, it's amazing win-win.
Teresa, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's intended for transportation infrastructure projects.
Correct. So this is looking specifically at physical changes to the transportation infrastructure. So something like, say, a roadway widening would be the classic example of this. So if you wanted to add an additional lane, if you have a highway project for Caltrans, for instance, that's adding additional capacity, or if you're, say, adding large pieces of transit infrastructure. But this is really intended to be an overall look at your infrastructure system.
So if we want to put a hyperloop, that would qualify.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Yes,
or
that would qualify.
Tram?
Or it's just like a Simpsons with the tram, but okay. Okay. All right. I guess we can move on. There's not much we can do here.
Well, I don't know. I mean, if you guys, you can specify a different thing if you want, but it's not clear to me what that would be.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's highly unlikely on your end.
I mean, yeah, they're totally guessing that this would be probably not a good thing.
Well, I think it would communicate to the fact that, we're happy with staff's recommendations. There might be some exceptions with a Hyperloop and a potential, if we got rid of VTA in our city and provided Uber as an option. That's what I put in the record.
I don't know. If I may comment again as a counterpoint, I think that I understand what you're saying, Ray, around your Uber plan. There's the amount of deadheading that's involved there because of the density here. Everything costs twice as much. Until there's a breakthrough, like, there's not a human driving the car anymore. And I mean, even Uber's not doing that anymore. Well, but I mean, they sold off their.
No, I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you.
There isn't any mechanism that's going to help. I think that one of the realities of Cupertino is the reason we're a transit corridor is for no reason other than the fact the Anza College is in Cupertino. And it's going to still be in Cupertino, and it will still continue, in the future. In sometimes in the future, when people actually start going to the Anza again, it will continue to be, a factor. Maybe only just a small factor in the giant scheme of things. Although I suspect VTA is very interesting because they actually publish the number of people who come in on and off every bus on every route every day. So you actually can see how many people were there. That will continue to be a number of sorts. So, the thing is, I think my takeaway from this is that if the choices are to, build traditional traffic infrastructure or dedicate money into something else, something that has higher, higher share rate, well, then you would consider the second, except the reality is that on a city basis, it just can't happen. So anyway.
I just want to make sure we take care of people if they can't get through on transit, if some changes. But let's move on. Let's move to screening guidance then. So.
So I'll start on this slide to talk about the specifically the high quality transit corridor issue, and then we'll move on to the next one to talk about the remaining potential screening questions.
Okay, I need a reminder here. So the half mile, inside a half mile of a major transit corridor is essentially an exception.
Yes, the language in statute is that projects in that radius should be presumed to have a less than significant impact on VMT.
And so increasing that radius is taking more projects exempt, and decreasing it is limiting the projects that can be exempt.
Correct.
And also, just as a reminder here, a large scale project would probably still have to have an analysis.
Yeah,
I believe that was said in this.
There would be an EIR would be needed on any large scale project.
I had a question about how the half mile number comes along. Is it considered to be walkable distance or bikeable, or what's the rationale behind that?
The high quality transit corridor and major transit stop definitions are CEQA definitions that include that half mile buffer. And the general theory behind them is that is the area in which you can reach in a 10-minute walk.
Okay, so 10-minute walk is the rule of thumb here.
Correct. So that's kind of the theory that underlies that definition.
I'm fine with it.
I have no issues with this either. If you guys want to recommend a reduction of the distance, I don't have a problem with that either. It has the effect of even though the 10-minute walk is kind of the range of what you might consider. reality, probably by the time you get to the half-mile radius, there's a lot less incentive.
Yeah, I was probably gonna go for a quarter or actually no exemption. That's kind of where my heads were at. So, and leverage the Redwood City precedent.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one concern I have is that you have to cross red lights and everything. I mean, I'll give you an example. When we were actually going to office, I had to cross the Stelling and Stevens Creek crossing to go from my parking lot to the bus stop, and I had to budget for an extra 5 minutes just to get through that, because it like goes in one circle, and if you have to go diagonally across,
Who cares?
it takes quite a bit of time. So.
I'm a half mile. David's half or a quarter. You guys are quarter or zero, right?
I'm up to quarter or zero. If the 10 minute minute thing is something.
I've got a lot. I've either got to leave.
Okay with a quarter? You're quarter with a quarter?
Yeah, I'm okay with a quarter.
I think everyone's okay with a quarter suggestion. Are you okay? Commissioner Fung is not sure.
No.
You okay with the quarter?
I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that because I think practically that's going to happen. Commissioner Saxena, the reason that crosswalk takes so long to cross is because that was designed under LOS rules rather than VMT.
Yeah, I knew you were going there. I knew you were going there. I knew you were going
I knew it was coming.
I knew you were going there. Fine. All right, let's look at exemptions here. Exceptions, sorry. I mean, the exceptions named in statute, we don't have a choice on, right? That's why they're in statute. I just want to clarify that with staff so everybody else knows what we're doing. Is that correct?
Actually, Teresa, can you confirm that? I believe that is.
Yeah, so they are named in statute. There may be some legal ways to kind of like think about how that might apply specifically to Cupertino, but generally speaking, they are part of CEQA as written law.
I think those are consistent with the law, and especially with 100% affordable housing projects and the small projects. I'm actually not interested in following OPR's guidance for any of the other areas. So, but I'm okay. I mean, statutes are statutes. We'll follow them, and
And what's the definition of local serving retail here, just for my clarification?
Yes, so that is sort of left to interpretation on a project by project basis. The types of examples given are things such as grocery stores, drugstores, dry cleaners, places that you largely are agnostic as to where it is. You just go to the place that is closest to you.
Okay, thank you.
I think we can approve those case by case. We're not going to get too many of those projects either. So, and leave that to the Planning Commission and the City Council. That
in 2040,
composition will change over time. So.
Yeah, for my part at least, I have no issue with the local serving retail. If the consideration, if the council wanted to consider that at a different threshold level, I think that must be big grocery store size. I have no problem with that either. I don't think that we have an issue about, the low VMT area exemption wouldn't even probably apply anywhere here. So
I believe there may be one residential zone in the entire city that could potentially apply that logic. So it's a bit of a moot point for Cupertino.
Yeah, I think let's just keep that. Let's not single out that neighborhood, because I think.
Yeah, let's not single out that neighborhood. I see. Does anyone live there? No, just kidding.
Somebody's going to think about it, and then they're going to come after us and say, "Why did you single this out?" I think.
But hey, just to give some stats, average grocery store is typically about 40,000 square feet, right? Most ones are 20,000 for the mini types, and Trader Joe's and Aldi's are typically like 12,000. So just to give you one idea of what square footage is. So it is for shopping. So
I think as long as the definition of local serving is something which we can deliberate on, I'm fine with the local serving one, because I think I will want to have the lowest barriers to retail in Cupertino. Because we don't even have, we can do more with that. It helps get a sales tax to the city, and I've had to drive many miles just to get a pair of shoes for my son. So I don't mind. I think that would be something which would be consistent with what a lot of residents would want.
And to give you an idea, the average Costco is about 145,000 square feet. So
Yeah. So I'm fine with the first one, and the second one, I think let's not single out a neighborhood. Let's just keep it without it.
okay, so does it sound like we have some kind of like people are okay with an exemption for local serving retail? That seems to be the thing. Is the square footage of 50,000 okay? And then after that, they'd have to come to us anyways. Like a Costco actually benefit you, right? You know, that's a different problem. So whereas a retail store, other people might come into us. I mean, there are no food deserts between us and our surrounding cities. So it's not like one of those issues where more VMTs being created because we put another like, well, actually, no, if you put an ethnic grocery store, you might get that. So,
well, I think the consideration here actually is that local serving retail at that size, supermarkets are notoriously low in profit margin. So what you're doing is you're saying, hey, let's create an incentive for businesses like that to be in this area. Costco is the opposite, right? They're high margin or relatively high, certainly high revenue. So they don't necessarily need the help.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think retail is something which needs help in our region.
Or avoid an EB5 housing scheme on a shopping plaza, but hey, we wouldn't be doing any of that here. So okay, I'm fine. I can happy to go along with you guys on that. I'm not fine with the projects in low VMT areas. If you guys are okay with getting rid of that, is there any objection to getting rid of that as an exception?
I think it doesn't matter to anybody, so yeah. I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, I think let's just, if it's just one neighborhood, let us not single them out. Yeah.
Okay, well, there you have it. Those are our recommendations. Anything else?
I think that summarizes everything we need. We appreciate everyone's feedback tonight. And I think maybe if I could just take a moment to just go over the next steps, just so for sake of clarity. Is that okay, Ben?
Sure.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Vice Chair. So we'll return as soon as we can with an ordinance that summarizes all of the feedback tonight. It will have details in there like the quarter-mile buffer, not allowing screening in low VMT areas, all the details that were discussed. The staff report will summarize everyone's comments separately. And then we will also include all of the baseline information that was mentioned about Apple and Valco, and I'll get clarity on that and make sure to include it in the staff report. I can include any sort of analysis on how that may have changed by a percentage point or whatever that is, so that we have clarity, and then we'll bring that back as soon as we can as an action item.
Sounds good.
I would only say on the, go ahead.
Go ahead, Commissioner Fung. You wanted to?
Oh, I was just going to say that, we did have a discussion here about how something, using the Costco example, that it could be a reduction and it could be an increase. So I hope that, that you reflect that in your estimates of the effect of, a Valco project or of Apple Park.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's good to know. It's just that those projects are so big, given the size of a city. It's just, I would say, our civic duty to make sure we incorporate that in the decisions we have. Even if it is a no-op, well and good, that's great for us. But having that available is probably...
I would just say, for instance, Apple has a pretty extensive TDM. Mm-hmm. So, that is a factor. It is not a matter of a product of 34 times the number of people who work there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, I just want accurate numbers. I mean, and then so we can actually run with something. So, but hey, thank you very much. Thank you to staff. Oh wait, Commissioner Takashi, you have one last word.
If I remember right, the Apple TDM, that project was approved, their minimum commitment was at least 28% ridership on BTM, and I think they wanted to do a lot more, but that was what they were willing to commit to get the project passed, and that's what was modeled in the EAR. Mm-hmm. I remember that.
If they keep doing work from home, it won't even matter. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. And do we get a annual update from them on this topic about how they're actually measuring up against those goals, like for the staff?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Apple does have a parking mitigation plan, and they do report annually.
Okay, thank you.
Progress.
They pay for an audit. I believe that's one of the conditions of their approval was the traffic
They
audit.
did. They pay for an audit for a traffic audit. So, hey, I want to thank everybody here. I know it's getting late. I want to thank staff. I want to thank the consultants. Thank you for helping us look at VMT, be compliant, help us with GHG goals, as well as improve the quality of life here. Really appreciate the work, and thank you to the commissioners here and staff. So let's move on to the next agenda item, which we're going to table. So if that's okay with everyone. Commissioner Takahashi, are you leaving?
Yes. Thank you.
Before you do that, let me officially table the item so you can leave and not be marked as leaving. Okay. How's that? So, okay. So we are on agenda item number 3. City Attorney, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Are we moving on to the tabling of that item?
Yes, we are.
Great. Okay. I believe Director Fu may have a date certain.
Yeah,
yes, let's do that.
Thank you, Vice Chair and Assistant City Attorney. So the next regularly scheduled Planning Commission meeting will be January 12th. So I recommend that you move that item to the January 12th hearing.
I'd like to make a motion to.
Right.
I'd like to make a motion to move the third item to our January 12th Planning Commission meeting, which will be our second to last. Go ahead, Commissioner Takahashi. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay. Can we do a vote from our city clerk?
Okay. Commissioner Takahashi?
Aye.
Commissioner Fung?
Aye.
Commissioner Saxena?
Aye.
And Vice Chair Wong?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries unanimously.
With that quickly, is there any new business to report?
No new business.
Any staffing commission reports?
No staff reports.
I actually attended the mayor's meeting, so I can give you a very, very brief report.
Do it very brief. Alan's waiting on you.
Yeah, it was extremely brief. It was an extremely brief meeting. We had reasonable coverage. I would actually classify the items as mostly pretty normal. There was actually an extended discussion when I raised the items that were discussed. One of them was the mobile business statute, and it actually led to quite a very interesting discussion there about people who liked food trucks, didn't like food trucks, liked services trucks, etc. So I suspect that at some point in time, I guess that got delayed. It's coming back up to the council, so I'm sure there'll be some public input on that. But that would be my report for the mayor's meeting.
Very cool. Very wonderful. Anyone else? I'll report on my mayor's meeting next meeting so that we don't take up too much time. And with it, I'd like to adjourn today's December 8th Planning Commission meeting. Thank you all for joining us and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.